7 brides had walked through Gideon Vale's gates. 7 brides had fled screaming within days, their terror echoing through the city below. The rumors grew darker with each escape. Some whispered about violence, others about occult rituals. A few swore they'd heard inhuman sounds from the East Wing at midnight. Marin Bell knew the stories. She'd heard them all. But when her brother's debt collectors promised broken bones and worse, she made a choice that would either destroy her or reveal the truth behind the mansion's locked doors. What she found there wasn't what anyone expected, including her. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain hammered against the taxi windows as Marin Bell clutched the single suitcase that held everything she owned. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, more tired than 32 had any right to look. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her body, soft and heavy in ways the world never let her forget, pressed uncomfortably against the worn seat. "You sure about this address, lady?" The driver's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror, concern creasing his weathered face. "Vale Estate? I know what it is." Marin's voice came out harder than she intended. She softened it. "I know." The driver's jaw worked like he wanted to say more, but he just shook his head and turned his attention back to the winding road that climbed toward the hilltop mansion. Through the rain-streaked window, Marin caught glimpses of the city below, the city where she'd spent the last decade working doubles at St. Catherine's Hospice, where she'd held the hands of the dying and forgotten, where she'd scraped together every dollar only to watch her brother Jamie gamble it away at underground poker games she didn't even know existed until 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since 2 men in expensive suits knocked on her apartment door with an offer that made her stomach turn. Marry Gideon Vale, stay married for 1 year, and Jamie's $60,000 debt disappears. Refuse, and they'd start with his fingers. "Crazy bastard's been through 7 wives already," the driver muttered, apparently unable to help himself. "My cousin's girlfriend's sister was number 4, lasted 3 days, came out of there white as a sheet, wouldn't talk about what she saw." Marin said nothing. She'd done her research. 7 women in 3 years, all marriages annulled within a week, all signing ironclad ND. As that kept their mouths shut tighter than graves. The internet was full of speculation. Gideon Vale, tech industry titan who'd built a security software empire worth billions, was either a sadist, a madman, or something worse. His late wife had died 4 years ago. Car accident, officially, though conspiracy theorists had other ideas. After that, the parade of brides began. The mansion emerged from the mist like something out of a Gothic nightmare. Graystone, 3 stories, windows dark except for a single light on the ground floor. The architecture was beautiful in a severe way, all clean lines and careful proportions, but the grounds looked neglected. Overgrown hedges pressed against the walls, and the fountain in the circular driveway sat empty, leaves rotting in its basin. "Last chance to change your mind," the driver said as he pulled up to the entrance. Marin paid him, added a generous tip she couldn't afford, and stepped out into the rain. The taxi's taillights disappeared down the hill before she'd even reached the front door. She didn't have to knock. The door swung open before her hand touched the wood, and a woman in her 60s appeared, slim, elegant, with silver hair pulled into a ruthless bun and eyes that assessed Marin in 3 seconds flat. "Miss Bell, I'm Patricia Hayes, house manager. You're early." Not a greeting, just a statement of fact. Traffic was light. Marin stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, leaving puddles on the marble floor. "Should I not have come early?" Something flickered across Patricia's face. Surprise, maybe, or approval. Most of the others arrived exactly on time, calculated to the minute. "Follow me." The interior was nothing like Marin expected. She'd braced herself for opulence, for the kind of showcase wealth that announced itself in gold fixtures and crystal chandeliers. Instead, the mansion was almost austere. Clean, expensive, but restrained. The furniture looked comfortable rather than impressive. The art on the walls was abstract, soothing in muted blues and grays. Everything was immaculate, but there was something off about it, a tension in the air, like the house was holding its breath. They passed a staircase, and Marin's eyes caught on something strange. A baby gate at the bottom, the kind meant to keep toddlers from climbing, but heavy-duty, reinforced with extra panels. Patricia saw her looking. I'll show you to your room. Mr. Vale will meet with you at 7. It's 5 now. Then you have 2 hours to settle in and reconsider your choices. Patricia's tone was dry, but not unkind. She led Marin up the stairs, down a hallway lined with closed doors, to a bedroom that was larger than Marin's entire apartment had been. The room was beautiful, understated luxury in creams and soft grays, a 4-poster bed that looked like sleeping on a cloud, French doors that probably opened onto a balcony with a view of the city. Marin set her suitcase down and turned to find Patricia watching her with an expression that was hard to read. The others had questions, Patricia said. Demands, usually. About staff, about access to Mr. Vale's accounts, about their role here. I don't have demands. Marin sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. I have a contract. I'm here to fulfill it. Why? The question was so direct it startled her. Marin looked at the older woman and made a calculation. Honesty might be dangerous, but lies would be worse. My brother made mistakes, bad ones. I'm fixing them. Patricia nodded slowly. At least you're honest. That's more than the others managed. She moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice, Miss Bell. Don't go into the East Wing, not without Mr. Vale's explicit permission. Is that where he keeps the bodies? Marin meant it as a joke, but it came out flat. No. Patricia's face was unreadable. It's where he keeps what matters most. Dinner's at 6:30, if you'd like to eat before the meeting. I'll send someone to fetch you. Then she was gone, and Marin was alone in a room that cost more per night than she used to make in a week. She stood, walked to the French doors, opened them despite the rain. The balcony was small, just enough room to stand, and the view was obscured by darkness and weather. But she could feel the city below, her city, the place where Jamie was probably celebrating his sister's sacrifice at whatever bar would still serve him. She loved him. That was the stupid, stubborn truth. He was weak and selfish, and completely unable to see past his next thrill. But he was her little brother, and she'd raised him after their mother died, and she couldn't let them break his hands, even if he probably deserved it. 1 year, she said to the rain. I can do anything for 1 year. She didn't believe it, but she said it anyway. Marin declined dinner. The thought of sitting alone in some formal dining room, waited on by staff who probably pitied her, was more than she could handle. Instead, she showered in the bathroom that was bigger than her old bedroom, changed into the only decent outfit she'd packed, black slacks and a charcoal sweater that hid her body's curves and bulges, and waited. At 6:55, there was a soft knock. A young woman in casual clothes, jeans and a sweater, opened the door. Miss Bell? I'm Sophie. I'll take you to Mr. Vale. Sophie couldn't have been more than 25, with kind eyes and an openness that seemed out of place in this tense house. As they walked, Marin heard something that made her steps falter, a rhythmic thumping sound coming from behind one of the closed doors in the East Wing. Thump, 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 regular as a heartbeat. What is that? Sophie's expression closed off instantly. Mr. Vale will explain what he chooses to explain. This way, please. They descended to the ground floor, but instead of heading toward what looked like a formal office, Sophie led her to a room that was clearly a study, lived in, comfortable, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace where actual flames burned. A man stood with his back to them, staring into the fire. Mr. Vale, Miss Bell is here. Thank you, Sophie. His voice was deep, controlled, with an edge of exhaustion that surprised Marin. He turned, and she got her first real look at Gideon Vale. The photos online didn't do him justice, and they also lied. He was tall, 6'2" or 6'3", with the kind of build that spoke of disciplined exercise rather than vanity, dark hair going gray at the temples, sharp features that would have been handsome if they weren't etched with permanent tension. But it was his eyes that caught her, dark, intelligent, haunted in a way that had nothing to do with romance novel brooding and everything to do with someone who hadn't slept properly in years. He was younger than she expected, 40, maybe 42. The internet made him sound ancient. Miss Bell? He didn't offer his hand. Please, sit. Marin sat in one of the leather chairs near the fire. Gideon took the other, and for a moment they just looked at each other. She refused to look away first, refused to be intimidated by the weight of his stare. You're not what I expected, he said finally. Neither are you. The rumors said you'd have horns and a tail by now. His mouth twitched, Not quite a smile, but close. The rumors say a lot of things. Most of them are designed to make sense of something people don't understand. And what don't they understand? Why 7 intelligent women would run from this house as if the devil himself lived here. Gideon leaned back and she saw how tired he really was. Not just physically, but soul-deep exhausted. I assume you've read the contract. Twice. Marriage for 1 year, separate bedrooms, no expectation of intimacy, public appearances as required, full annulment, and financial settlement at the end. Marin kept her voice even. And an NDA that would bankrupt me if I ever spoke about what happens in this house. Does that concern you? Everything about this concerns me, but I'm here anyway. Because of your brother's debt. It wasn't a question. Of course he knew. Men like Gideon Vale didn't make offers without doing their research. James Bell, 28, gambling addiction, currently owes money to people who don't accept payment plans. Marin's jaw tightened. You know why I'm here. What I don't know is why you need a wife so badly you'd pay off $60,000 in debt for a woman you've never met. $73,000, actually. Interest accumulated while we were negotiating. Gideon stood, walked to a side table, poured 2 glasses of what looked like whiskey. He brought one to her without asking if she wanted it. The previous candidates were all selected from a specific pool: society women, minor celebrities, professional socialites, women who understood that this was a business arrangement and would play their part in exchange for money and status. Let me guess. They didn't play their part. They couldn't. He sat back down, rolling the glass between his palms. Because I didn't tell them the truth before they arrived. I thought, foolishly, that once they were here they'd adapt, that the financial incentive would be enough. But it wasn't. No. The word was heavy with something that might have been regret or anger or both. Miss Bell, I'm going to be direct with you because clearly my previous approach was ineffective. I need a wife for legal reasons, not romantic ones, not sexual ones. I need someone who can live in this house, participate in the occasional public event, and maintain the appearance of a stable marriage. Why? Because I'm fighting for custody of my son, and every lawyer I've consulted has told me the same thing. A single father, even a wealthy one, has a harder time than a married couple, especially when that father has a reputation for failed marriages, and when the child in question is... He stopped, the words seeming to catch in his throat. Marin waited. The thumping sound from upstairs had stopped, replaced by something else. A high-pitched sound, not quite a scream, but close. Gideon's entire body tensed. Especially when the child has significant special needs, he continued, his voice careful now, controlled. My son, Eli, is 4 years old. He's autistic, nonverbal. He has sensory processing issues. He doesn't sleep well, and he has meltdowns that can last for hours. The previous wives... Another pause, and this time she heard anger underneath the control. They weren't prepared for the reality of living with a child like Eli. They expected a quiet house, an absent husband, and an easy year of luxury. What they got was screaming at 2 a.m, a child who couldn't be touched without preparation, and a household that revolves entirely around routines that can't be broken. Understanding crashed over Marin like cold water. The thumping sound, the reinforced baby gates, the tension in the house. They ran, she said softly, because you have a disabled child. They ran because I have a child who needs more than they were willing to give, and because I made it clear from day one that Eli comes first, before comfort, before convenience, before anything. Gideon's knuckles were white around his glass. His mother died when he was 6 months old. I've been fighting for him every day since. And now my late wife's brother is trying to take him from me, claiming that I can't provide a stable home environment, that Eli would be better off in a specialized facility. You mean an institution? Marin felt sick. Yes, the word was clipped. Adrian Crow doesn't give a damn about Eli's well-being. He wants control of the trust Eli's mother left behind. $10 million that Eli can't access until he's 25, but that his legal guardian can manage. I won't let him do it. The sound upstairs intensified, rhythmic banging now, accompanied by that high keen. Gideon's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. You should go to him, Marin said. Sophie is with him. She's one of the few people he tolerates during a meltdown. If I go up now, it might escalate. He looked at her, and she saw something raw in his expression. This is what the others couldn't handle, Miss Bell. This is the truth they signed NDAs to never speak about. Gideon Vale's terrible secret isn't that he's a monster. It's that he's a father to a child who doesn't fit the world's expectations. And he's built his entire life around making that child feel safe. Marin's throat felt tight. She'd spent 10 years working with people the world found inconvenient. The dying, the elderly, the ones who couldn't feed themselves or control their bodies anymore. She'd held their hands, cleaned their messes, sat with them through pain and fear and confusion. She'd never run. I need honesty from you, Gideon continued. Can you handle living in this house? Can you handle the reality that there will be screaming, that routines are non-negotiable, that you'll be expected to participate in Eli's care, at least minimally? Because if you can't, it's better that you leave now, before he has a chance to notice you're here, and then you disappear like all the others. Marin thought about Jamie, about the debt, about the year ahead. But she also thought about a 4-year-old boy upstairs who'd lost his mother and might lose his father too, all because the world couldn't make room for children who needed extra patience. I worked hospice care for 10 years, she said quietly. I've cleaned up things that would make your society wives faint. I've held down patients during seizures. I've sat through hours of screaming from dementia patients who didn't know where they were. I've learned to communicate with people who couldn't speak. I didn't run from any of that. Hospice care is temporary. You knew the patients would die, that your commitment had an end date. And this has an end date too, 1 year. Marin met his eyes. I'm not saying I'll be perfect at this. I'm not saying I won't make mistakes. But I won't run. Not from a child who needs stability. Gideon studied her for a long moment. Upstairs, the sounds were fading. Sophie's soft voice barely audible. Then silence. The wedding is in 3 days, he said finally. Civil ceremony, minimal guests, mostly lawyers and business associates. You'll move your things into the East Wing bedroom next to Eli's room. Not because of any romantic expectation, he added quickly, but because proximity matters for routines. He needs to know who's in the house, where they are. Okay. You'll meet him tomorrow. Sophie will introduce you. It might take days or weeks before he acknowledges your existence. Don't take it personally. I won't. And if you change your mind, if this becomes too much, you tell me immediately. Don't just disappear. He's already lost too many people. The way he said it made Marin wonder how much Gideon himself had lost. How many times he'd watched someone walk away from his son and, by extension, from him. I won't disappear, she said. I promise. It was a promise she had no idea if she could keep, but she meant it. That night, Marin lay in her expensive bed and listened to the sounds of the house. Around midnight, she heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, then a child's cry. Not distressed, just wakeful. Gideon's voice, low and patient. I know, buddy, I know. Let's get you some water. More footsteps heading downstairs. Marin slipped out of bed, opened her door a crack. The hallway was dark except for a nightlight near the stairs, the kind that projected stars on the ceiling. She waited, and after a few minutes they came back, Gideon carrying a small figure in construction truck pajamas. The boy's face was buried in his father's shoulder, one hand opening and closing rhythmically, the other tangled in Gideon's shirt. Gideon's face, in the dim light, was transformed. All the tension was still there, but underneath it was something fierce and tender, the look of someone who'd walk through fire for the person in his arms. He disappeared into the East Wing, and Marin heard him singing, off-key, barely melodic but consistent. The same verse over and over, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. It took an hour for the house to go quiet again. Marin closed her door and sat on her bed, thinking about the man downstairs who'd been labeled a monster because he loved his son more than his reputation. Thinking about the child who'd sent 7 women running because he didn't fit their fantasy of easy money. Thinking about herself and whether she was actually brave enough to stay or just too trapped to leave. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, she dreamed of Jamie's smile, of debt collectors with cold eyes, of a little boy who communicated in gestures the world refused to learn. Morning came too early. Someone knocked at 6:30, and Marin opened the door to find Sophie holding a tray with coffee and toast. "Thought you might need this," Sophie said, her smile genuine. "First nights here are always rough." "I didn't sleep much." Marin took the coffee gratefully. "Does it get easier?" "Depends on what you mean by easier." Sophie leaned against the doorframe. "The routine becomes familiar. You learn the rhythms. But if you're asking whether it stops being hard, no. It doesn't. Eli's a wonderful kid, but he needs a lot. And Mr. Vale," she trailed off, diplomatic. "You can say it. He's difficult. He's protective. There's a difference." Sophie's expression softened. The others saw him as cold because he wouldn't prioritize them over Eli. But that's not coldness, that's love. He just doesn't have energy left over for romance or ego stroking. "I'm not here for romance." "I know, that's probably why you're still here." Sophie straightened. "I'll introduce you to Eli this morning, 9 o'clock in the playroom. Just prepare yourself. He might not look at you. He might completely ignore you. Don't push, don't force interaction. Let him come to you on his terms." After Sophie left, Marin showered and dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, the kind of comfortable clothes she'd worn at the hospice, nothing fancy. If she was going to meet a 4-year-old, she'd be practical. At 8:30, she went downstairs in search of real breakfast. The kitchen was huge, professional grade, and currently occupied by Patricia and a man who looked to be in his 60s wearing a chef's coat. "Miss Bell." Patricia didn't seem surprised to see her. "This is Martin, our chef. Martin, this is the new Mrs. Vale." "Not yet," Marin said. "Not for 3 more days." Martin's eyebrows rose, but he smiled. "What can I make you?" "Whatever's easy. I don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble." He was already pulling out eggs, vegetables. "Omelet work for you?" Marin sat at the kitchen island, watching him cook with the kind of efficiency that spoke of decades of practice. Patricia poured her more coffee, then surprised her by sitting down across from her. "You seem calmer than the others," Patricia observed. "Or maybe I'm just better at hiding panic." "Perhaps." Patricia's lips twitched. "But you came down to the kitchen instead of demanding breakfast in your room. You're wearing clothes you can move in instead of trying to impress. You asked what was easy instead of ordering something complicated. These are not small things." Martin slid a perfect omelet in front of Marin, and she ate while Patricia asked careful questions about her background, her work, her family. Not intrusive, just gathering information. Marin found herself being more honest than she'd planned, talking about the hospice, about the patients she'd loved and lost, about Jamie and his problems. "And you've never been married?" Patricia asked. "Never even close, too busy working, and—" Marin stopped, then figured honesty had gotten her this far. "And men don't exactly line up for someone who looks like me." Patricia's expression sharpened. "If you're expecting pity, you'll be disappointed. I have no patience for self-deprecation. It's not self-deprecation, it's just fact. I'm fat, I'm plain, I'm not the kind of woman who gets romantic opportunities." Marin shrugged. "I made peace with it a long time ago." "Good. Because Mr. Vale doesn't need someone fishing for compliments or validation. He needs someone competent." Patricia stood. "Sophie will come for you at 9. Be ready." Okay. The playroom was not what Marin expected. Instead of toys scattered everywhere in cheerful chaos, it was carefully organized. Clear bins with picture labels lined the walls. A sensory table sat in one corner filled with what looked like dried beans. Soft mats covered the floor in muted blues and greens. The lighting was gentle, indirect. Everything had a purpose, a place. Sophie was already there, setting up what looked like a train track. "He'll be here in a minute. Mr. Vale's getting him dressed. Mornings are hard. Eli doesn't like transitions." "What should I do?" "Sit over there, near the bookshelf. Don't stare at him directly. Don't try to talk to him. Just exist in his space and let him decide if you're worth investigating." Marin sat. Her heart was pounding harder than it had any right to. This was just a child. She'd worked with difficult populations before, but something about this felt more important, more fragile. The door opened and Gideon entered with Eli. The boy was small for 4, delicate-featured, with dark curls and huge brown eyes. He was wearing soft pants and a shirt with no tags. Marin noticed because Gideon was smoothing down the seams carefully, making sure nothing rubbed wrong. Eli's hands were moving constantly, fingers fluttering near his face, and he was making a low humming sound. Gideon's eyes found Marin's. A warning, a plea, a test, all at once. "Eli, this is Marin," Sophie said softly, not expecting a response. "She's going to be staying with us." Eli didn't look at Marin. He pulled away from Gideon and went straight to the trains, dropping to his knees and beginning to line them up with intense focus. Not playing exactly. Arranging. Red, blue, yellow, green, red, blue, yellow, green. Perfect order. Gideon lowered himself to the floor nearby. Not touching, just present. Sophie did the same on the other side. Marin stayed where she was, watching. Eli's humming changed pitch slightly as he worked, and she realized it wasn't random. He was matching the pattern of the trains. Red, blue, yellow, green, low, mid, high, higher, over and over. It was beautiful in its way. Pure focus, pure order. 20 minutes passed. Eli never looked at her, never acknowledged her existence. He moved from trains to the sensory table, plunging his hands into the beans and letting them flow through his fingers, that same hum continuing. Gideon stood, came over to Marin. "You can go. He's settling in for a while." "Can I stay?" He looked surprised. "There's no point. He won't interact with you." "I know, but I'd like to stay anyway, if that's okay." Something crossed Gideon's face. She couldn't read it, but he nodded and went back to his position on the floor. Marin stayed for 2 hours. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't do anything but exist in that carefully ordered space. Eli cycled through his activities, trains, beans, a set of textured squares he pressed to his face, more trains. The humming continued, sometimes louder, sometimes barely audible. And once, just once, as he walked past her to reach a bin of blocks, his eyes flickered in her direction. Not making contact, but acknowledging, noticing. It was the smallest thing. But in that moment, Marin understood why Gideon fought so hard. This child was not broken. He was just speaking a language no one had bothered to learn. When she finally stood to leave, her legs cramping from sitting so long, Gideon walked her to the door. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "I didn't do anything." "You stayed, without expectations. That's more than—" He stopped, the sentence unfinished. "Most people can't tolerate being ignored." "I wasn't being ignored. I was being assessed." Marin smiled slightly. "He noticed me. Right at the end." Gideon's eyebrows rose. "You saw that?" "I'm observant. It's part of the job." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant he recalibrated his opinion of her. "The wedding is Saturday. Are you still committed?" "Yes." "Why? You could walk away right now, and I'd pay off your brother's debt anyway. You've already given me more than the others did just by staying this morning." Marin thought about it, about the real answer underneath the convenient one. "Because Jamie needs help, yes. But also because I spent 10 years watching people die, and I got tired of endings. I'd like to be part of something that's fighting to stay alive." It was maybe too honest, too raw. But Gideon didn't flinch from it. "Then welcome to the fight, Miss Bell," he said. "It's going to be hell." "Good thing I'm used to that," she replied. And despite everything, despite the strangeness and the fear and the uncertainty, she meant it. The wedding happened in a courthouse downtown on a gray Saturday morning that threatened snow but never delivered. Marin wore a simple navy dress she'd bought off the clearance rack at a department store, and Gideon showed up in a dark suit that probably cost more than her entire year's salary at the hospice. There were 7 people in attendance: the judge, Patricia, Sophie, Martin, 2 lawyers whose names Marin immediately forgot, and a photographer who documented everything with clinical efficiency. Eli wasn't there. Gideon had explained the night before that courtrooms were too overwhelming, the echoes, the fluorescent lights, the unpredictability of strangers. Sophie stayed home with him, which meant the most important person in both their lives was absent from the ceremony that was supposedly about building him a stable home. The irony wasn't lost on Marin. "Do you, Marin Elizabeth Bell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She looked at Gideon, who was looking at her with an expression that was carefully neutral. They'd barely spoken in the 3 days since her morning in the playroom. He'd been busy with work, with Eli, with 1,000 details that apparently went into arranging a marriage that was really just a legal strategy. She'd spent the time moving her few possessions into the bedroom next to Eli's, learning the house's rhythms, watching from a distance as Gideon navigated his son's needs with the kind of exhausted precision that came from years of practice. "I do," she said. "And do you, Gideon Alexander Vale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." The words were just sounds, legal formalities that meant everything and nothing. The judge pronounced them married. Gideon slipped a simple platinum band on her finger. They hadn't discussed rings, but apparently he'd thought of it. And that was it. Mrs. Gideon Vale. A title that felt like wearing someone else's coat. The photographer took pictures of them signing documents, standing together, even one where Gideon's hand rested lightly on her back. Anyone looking at the photos would see a couple. Maybe not radiant, but solid. Respectable. Exactly what the lawyers needed to show a judge in a custody hearing. Afterward, back at the house, there was no reception, no celebration. Martin had prepared a nice lunch, but it sat mostly untouched while Gideon disappeared upstairs to relieve Sophie, and Maren found herself alone in the formal dining room, staring at her wedding ring and wondering what the hell she'd actually agreed to. Patricia found her there 20 minutes later. "Not quite the romantic dream, is it?" "I wasn't expecting romance." "Still, most women at least get flowers." But Patricia set down a small vase with white roses. Simple, elegant, completely unexpected. "These are from Martin and me. Welcome to the family, such as it is." Maren's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The hard part's just starting." Patricia sat across from her, which felt significant. The house manager never seemed to sit, never seemed to stop moving. "You understand that Adrian Crow's lawyers are going to investigate you. Your background, your finances, your relationship with Mr. Vale. They'll try to prove this marriage is a sham." "It is a sham." "Legally? No. You signed a marriage certificate. You live in this house. What happens between you and Mr. Vale behind closed doors is nobody's business but yours." Patricia's gaze was sharp. "But they'll look for cracks. Separate bedrooms, no affection, no history together. So you'll need to build a foundation that looks real enough to withstand scrutiny." "How am I supposed to do that?" "By doing what you've already started doing. Be present. Be consistent. Learn Eli's routines. Participate in his care. Become part of the household's actual structure instead of just a name on paper." Patricia stood. "The custody hearing is in 8 weeks. Between now and then, you need to become indispensable. Not to Mr. Vale. He doesn't need you. But to Eli's daily life. That's what will convince a judge." 8 weeks. It sounded like forever, and no time at all. That night, Maren lay in bed listening to the house settle around her. Around 11, she heard Eli wake up. His cry was distinctive now, different from distress, just a signal that sleep had ended and he needed something. Gideon's footsteps, then soft voices. The routine of water, bathroom, the star-projecting nightlight. The same verse of the same song. She wondered if Gideon ever slept a full night. She wondered how long a person could function on broken rest and sheer stubbornness before something gave way. The next morning, Sophie knocked on her door at 7. "Mr. Vale asked if you'd like to join breakfast. In the kitchen, not the dining room." Maren dressed quickly, came downstairs to find the kitchen in organized chaos. Eli was in a booster seat at the island, methodically eating cut-up waffles, no syrup, Maren noticed, and arranged in a specific pattern on his plate. Gideon was drinking coffee and reading something on his tablet while simultaneously keeping one eye on his son. Martin was at the stove, and Patricia was reviewing what looked like the day's schedule. It felt like walking into a scene she wasn't part of, except Sophie pulled out the stool next to Eli's and said, "Sit here. He needs to get used to you being in his space." Maren sat. Eli didn't look at her, but his hand stilled briefly on his fork before continuing its precise movements. Noticing again, always noticing. "Coffee?" Martin asked. "Please." Gideon glanced up from his tablet. "Did you sleep?" "Some. You?" "Some." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of the lie they were both telling. "We have a routine on Sundays. Playground at 9:30, lunch at noon, quiet time from 1 to 3, dinner at 5:30. You're welcome to join any or all of it." "I'd like to join all of it, if that's okay." But something flickered across his face. Eli might not tolerate it. He's particular about who's present during certain activities. Then I'll learn which ones I can be part of and which ones I can't. Marin accepted the coffee Martin handed her. That's how this works, right? I learn his language. Gideon set down his tablet, giving her his full attention for the first time since the courthouse. Most people expect him to learn theirs. Most people are wrong. The words came out harder than she intended, sharp with years of watching the world demand that vulnerable people conform instead of making space for them. Gideon's eyebrows rose, but he didn't look offended. If anything, he looked interested. You worked hospice for 10 years, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What made you choose that? Marin thought about deflecting, giving some easy answer about needing a job or liking to help people. But Eli was eating his waffles, 3 bites from the left side, 2 from the right, 3 from the left, and Gideon was watching her with those sharp, tired eyes, and she was tired of easy answers. My mother died when I was 19, she said. Pancreatic cancer, very fast, very brutal. The hospice nurse who took care of her at the end was the first person who treated her like she still mattered, even when she couldn't talk anymore, couldn't recognize us. I wanted to be that person for someone else. And your father? Gone before I have any memories of him. It was just me, my mom, and Jamie. Marin wrapped her hands around the warm mug. I raised him from 13 on. Did a terrible job, apparently, since he ended up with a gambling addiction and debts to dangerous people. You were a child yourself. It wasn't your job to raise him perfectly. Tell that to the guilt. She shrugged. Anyway, I fell into hospice work and stayed because I was good at it. Good at sitting with people in their worst moments. Good at not running when things got hard. Eli suddenly pushed his plate away. Not violently, just done. Gideon immediately moved to help him down from the seat, wiping his hands with a specific cloth that was apparently kept just for that purpose. Playground time, Sophie said. I'll get his coat. I'll get it. The words were out before Marin could think about them. If you tell me where it is and how he likes it put on. Sophie and Gideon exchanged a glance. Patricia stopped reviewing her schedule. Even Martin paused his cooking. The kitchen went quiet except for Eli's humming. A new pattern today, something Marin didn't recognize. Hall closet? Blue coat with the soft lining, Gideon said finally. Zipper has to go up slowly, not fast. Hat goes on before coat, gloves after. And he'll probably fight the gloves. Okay. Marin found the coat, brought it back to where Eli was now standing by the door. Shifting his weight from foot to foot in what she was learning meant anticipation or anxiety or both. She knelt down to his level, not directly in front of him, but off to the side in his peripheral vision. Hey, Eli, we're going to put your coat on now. She kept her voice low, calm. Hat first. She held up the hat, soft knit, dark blue, and waited. Eli's hands were fluttering near his face, and his eyes were focused on something past her shoulder. But after a moment, he stepped closer. Not touching her, but close enough that she could reach him. Marin put the hat on gently, smoothing it down. Eli's humming pitch changed, went higher, but he didn't pull away. Coat next, guiding his arms through the sleeves with the same slow care she'd used with hospice patients who couldn't manage their own clothing. Zipper up, 1 careful inch at a time. Then the gloves. Eli saw them and immediately stepped back, shaking his head, the first clear communicative gesture she'd seen from him. I know, she said, but it's cold outside. Your hands will hurt. He shook his head again, more insistent. Gideon moved forward. Eli, gloves. The tone was firm, but not harsh. Eli's whole body tensed, and for a second Marin thought they were heading for a meltdown. But then Eli held out one hand, fingers spread rigid, and Gideon quickly worked the glove on. Then the other hand. Good job, buddy. Gideon's voice softened. Okay, let's go. The playground was a private one, part of a small park that belonged to the estate's grounds. It wasn't fancy, just swings, a slide, some climbing equipment, but it was quiet, isolated, exactly what a child who couldn't handle crowds would need. Eli went straight to the swings. Not to swing, but to spin the chains, watching them twist and untwist with complete focus. Gideon stood nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give space. Marin stayed back, leaning against a tree, watching. The morning was cold, her breath misting in the air, but she barely felt it. She was too busy observing the way Eli moved, purposeful, precise, existing in his own world that had rules and patterns the rest of them could only guess at. "He'll do that for 20 minutes usually," Gideon said, coming to stand beside her. "Then the slide, then back to the swings. Same pattern every time." Consistency. It's how he makes sense of things. If the routine changes, even slightly, it can trigger hours of distress. Gideon's hands were shoved in his coat pockets, his shoulders tight. The other wives wanted to take him places. Museums, restaurants, shopping. They didn't understand that those environments are torture for him. "Did you explain it to them?" "I tried. They thought I was being overprotective, or they thought if they just exposed him to more stimulation, he'd adapt." His jaw clenched. Number 3 actually snuck him out to a children's museum while I was in a meeting. He had a meltdown so severe she called 911, convinced he was having a seizure. I got a call from the ER asking why my son was being brought in by a woman who couldn't answer basic questions about his medical history. Jesus. That was day 4. She was gone by day 5. Gideon watched Eli spin the swing chains. I should have been clearer from the start. Should have told them the truth before they arrived. But I kept hoping that maybe, if they saw him, they'd understand. That maternal instinct or human decency would kick in. But they didn't want to be mothers. They wanted to be wives to a billionaire. Yes, the word was bitter. And I was stupid enough to think those things could coexist. Eli abandoned the swings, headed for the slide. He climbed up, sat at the top, but didn't slide down. Just sat there, looking out at the grounds, his hands opening and closing in that rhythmic pattern. "What's he doing?" Marin asked. "Watching, processing, being still." Gideon's expression softened slightly. The world moves too fast for him most of the time. Moments like this, where he can just exist without demands, are important. They stood in silence for a while, and Marin found herself cataloging details. The way Gideon's entire body was oriented toward his son, hyper-alert for any sign of distress. The way his eyes never left Eli for more than a few seconds. The way his hand kept moving to his phone, then away, wanting to check work, she guessed, but refusing to be distracted. "Can I ask you something?" Marin said. "Marin, why me? Out of all the women you could have chosen, why someone with my background? Hospice care isn't exactly relevant to raising a child." Gideon was quiet for a moment. The lawyers compiled a list of candidates, women with the right social standing, the right connections. I rejected all of them. Then Patricia suggested thinking about it differently. Not who would photograph well at events, but who might actually survive living in this house. And Patricia picked me? She picked 3 possibilities. One was a former special education teacher who withdrew when she realized the marriage would be real and legal. One was a pediatric nurse who had a boyfriend she wasn't willing to leave. And then there was you, unmarried, no entanglements, experience with difficult patients, and a brother whose problems gave us leverage. So I was the desperate option. You were the practical option. There's a difference. He glanced at her. "I'm not romantic, Miss Bell. I can't afford to be. I needed someone who would stay, who wouldn't run when things got hard, who understood that love and caregiving are sometimes just showing up every day, even when it's exhausting." "Mrs. Vale," Marin corrected quietly. "What?" "It's Mrs. Vale now, legally anyway." Something crossed his face. She couldn't read it. "Right, I keep forgetting." Eli started down the slide slowly, controlling his descent. At the bottom, he stood and hummed a 3-note pattern, then climbed back up. The whole sequence took 90 seconds, and he repeated it exactly the same way 5 times. "His mother," Marin said carefully. "What was she like?" Gideon's whole body went rigid. For a second, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Brilliant, impulsive, terrible at routines, and spectacular at love. She died in a car accident when Eli was 6 months old. Distracted driving, she was texting someone and ran a red light." "I'm sorry?" "Everyone's sorry. It doesn't change anything." His voice was flat, controlled. The emotion locked down so tight she could almost see the effort it took. She loved him. She wasn't equipped to handle his needs. She barely understood them. He was so young when she died. But she loved him. And then she was gone, And I was alone with a baby who screamed for hours, who wouldn't make eye contact, who seemed to exist behind glass I couldn't break through. That must have been terrifying. It was. Is. He rubbed his face. Every day I'm afraid I'm failing him, that I'm not doing enough, not understanding enough, that he'd be better off with someone who actually knows what they're doing. You're his father. You're exactly who he needs. Am I? Because Adrian Crow's lawyers are going to argue the opposite. They're going to say a specialized facility with trained staff would give him better care, more structure, more opportunities for development. Development into what? Someone who fits their definition of normal? Marin felt her temper spike. I've seen those places. Clean, well-staffed, absolutely soul-crushing. They're designed to manage people, not to know them. Gideon looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. You're angry. Of course I'm angry. Your brother-in-law wants to lock a 4-year-old away because he's inconvenient, and he's using legal language and fake concern to do it. He's not my brother-in-law. He was my wife's brother, but she's gone. We're nothing to each other except obstacles. Gideon's hands clenched in his pockets. And he will lose. I'll make sure of it. Eli came down the slide one final time, then walked over to Gideon and pressed his face against his father's leg. No words, no eye contact, just that simple touch. Gideon's hand immediately went to Eli's head, gentle and automatic. Okay, buddy, we're done? Eli stepped back, humming that 3-note pattern again. That means yes, Gideon translated. Come on, let's go get lunch. The walk back to the house was quiet except for Eli's humming. Marin watched the two of them, Eli walking slightly ahead, Gideon matching his pace, both of them moving in a rhythm that was clearly established over years of practice. She was the outsider here, the addition to a system that worked fine without her. But she'd promised to stay. And Marin Bell didn't break her promises, even when she wasn't sure what she'd actually promised to become. Lunch was the same methodical affair as breakfast, Eli's food cut and arranged specifically, Gideon eating with one eye always on his son, the household moving around them with practiced efficiency. Afterward came quiet time, which apparently meant Eli went to his room with Sophie while Gideon retreated to his office for the work he couldn't avoid. Marin found herself alone again, wandering the house like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She ended up in the library, a beautiful room she'd only glimpsed before, with tall windows and shelves that went floor to ceiling. Most of the books were about business, technology, leadership, but one section was different: developmental psychology, autism spectrum disorders, nonverbal communication, sensory processing. She pulled out a thick volume on autism in early childhood and settled into one of the leather chairs. If she was going to be part of Eli's life, she needed to actually understand what that meant. Not just surface-level awareness, but real knowledge. She was 3 chapters in when Gideon found her. Most people use their free time to relax, he said from the doorway. I'm not most people. Marin held up the book. Do you mind? No, I'm just surprised. He came further into the room, and she noticed he looked marginally less exhausted than usual. How much do you know about autism? Only what I've picked up from the past few days. One of my hospice patients had a grandson on the spectrum, and she talked about him sometimes, but I never worked directly with autistic kids. It's not something you can learn from a book. No, but the book gives me a framework. Then I can learn from Eli himself. She closed the volume. Does he have a formal diagnosis? Yes. Autism spectrum disorder, level 3, which means he requires substantial support. Nonverbal, though his therapist thinks he might develop some functional speech eventually. Sensory processing disorder, mild intellectual disability, though that's hard to assess accurately in nonverbal children. The clinical language sat oddly with the fierce protectiveness she'd seen in him, like he was reciting a report instead of describing his son. What does Eli think about all those labels? She asked. Gideon's expression shifted. He doesn't think about them. He doesn't understand them. Are you sure? Just because he can't speak doesn't mean he doesn't understand. He stopped, seemed to reconsider. His comprehension is hard to gauge. Sometimes I think he understands everything. Other times I'm not sure he's even aware I'm in the room. Maybe both are true. Marin set the book aside. People are complicated. Disabled people are still people, which means they're still complicated. Oh, that sounds like something a therapist would say. That sounds like something someone who spent 10 years with dying people would say. You learn pretty quickly that consciousness and communication aren't the same thing. I had patients who couldn't speak, couldn't move, who everyone assumed were gone, but their eyes would track voices. They'd squeeze your hand at specific moments. They were still there, still aware, just trapped. Eli's not trapped. I didn't say he was. I'm saying don't assume you know the limits of his understanding just because he can't tell you in words. She stood, stretched. What happens after quiet time? Usually he watches the same episode of a construction show about 15 times. Then dinner, then bath, then the bedtime routine that takes about 90 minutes. Can I watch the construction show with him? Gideon looked skeptical. He watches it on the floor, very close to the screen. He doesn't like people nearby during screen time. Then I'll sit across the room. I'm just trying to understand his world. Why? The question was genuine, not hostile. Why does it matter to you? You're here because of your brother's debt. You could do the minimum, show up at legal proceedings, smile for photos, and fulfill the contract. Instead, you're reading textbooks and asking to spend time with a child who will probably never acknowledge your existence. Marin thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in years of caring for people nobody else wanted to care for, in the way she'd always gravitated toward the hard cases, because at least they were honest about needing help. When my mother was dying, she said slowly, people stopped visiting, stopped calling. It was too hard for them, watching her fade. I was 19, and I was so angry at all of them. Angry that they loved her right up until loving her became difficult. She met his eyes. I swore I'd never be that person, never be someone who only shows up when it's easy. This isn't your mother. This isn't even your child. No. But he's a person who needs consistency, and I promised I wouldn't run. So I'm not going to half-ass it just because the contract technically allows me to. She moved toward the door, then paused. Besides, maybe I'm curious. Maybe I want to know what all those other women were too scared to stay and find out. She left him standing there in the library, looking like she'd said something he didn't know how to process. Quiet time ended at 3. Marin came down to find the living room transformed, curtains drawn to reduce glare, Eli already on the floor approximately 18 inches from the television screen, the opening theme of Big Trucks, Big Jobs, starting up. Sophie was nearby with her laptop, working but available. Marin took a seat in the armchair farthest from Eli, pulled out her phone, and pretended to read while actually watching him. He was completely absorbed, mouthing along with parts of the narration, his hands moving in patterns that seemed to match the on-screen action. When a dump truck appeared, he made a specific motion, arms wide, then coming together. A crane got a different gesture, one arm up, rotating. He was speaking, she realized, just not with words. The episode ended. Eli immediately pressed a button on the remote. Clearly, he'd been taught this specific sequence, and it started again. Same episode, same routine. By the 4th repetition, Marin had most of it memorized. By the 6th, she found herself mouthing some of the words along with the narrator. By the 8th, she noticed Eli's head tilt slightly, not looking at her, but aware of her mimicry. After the 15th showing, Gideon appeared in the doorway. Eli, dinner time. Eli pushed the remote away. Done for now, routine complete. And stood. As he walked past Marin's chair, he paused, just for a second. His hand came up, made that dump truck gesture, arms wide, then together. Then he was gone, following his father toward the kitchen. Sophie was grinning. He signed to you. That wasn't sign language. No, but it was communication. He showed you something that matters to him. She closed her laptop. That's huge. He doesn't do that with new people. Marin's chest felt tight. I just watched a show with him. Well, near him. You watched it 15 times without complaining, without trying to change it, without making it about yourself. Trust me, that's more than the others managed. Sophie stood. Come on. Dinner seating is specific, and you need to learn where you sit. Dinner was chicken, rice, and steamed carrots for Eli. No foods touching, each item in its own section of a divided plate. For the adults, Martin had made something more elaborate, but Marin barely tasted it. She was too focused on the small human across from her, methodically eating 2 bites of chicken, one of rice, One of carrot, repeat. Gideon caught her watching. You're staring. Sorry, I'm just learning. Learning what? His patterns. The things that matter to him. She took a sip of water. The dump truck gesture. What does it mean? It means he's thinking about dump trucks, usually. Sometimes it means he wants to watch the show again. Sometimes it's just self-soothing. Gideon's expression was unreadable. You noticed it. Hard not to. He's very deliberate. Most people find it strange, off-putting. Most people are idiots. The words came out sharper than she intended. He's communicating perfectly clearly. It's not his fault the rest of us don't speak his language. Something shifted in Gideon's face, the armor cracking just slightly. That's what his therapist says, that we need to learn his communication style instead of forcing him into ours. Smart therapist. After dinner came bath time, which Marin was told she couldn't be part of. Too intimate, too routine-specific, too likely to cause distress with a new person present. So she retreated to her room and tried not to listen to the sounds of Gideon coaxing Eli through washing, drying, getting into pajamas. The patience in his voice was infinite and exhausted at the same time. At 8:30, there was a soft knock on her door. Gideon stood there looking wrung out. He's asking for you. What? Not asking exactly, but he keeps making the dump truck sign and looking at the hallway. I think... He rubbed his face. I think he wants you to say goodnight. Marin followed him to Eli's room, her heart pounding. The space was carefully designed, muted colors, soft lighting, minimal furniture. Eli was in bed, surrounded by stuffed trucks arranged in a specific order, his star nightlight already projecting constellations on the ceiling. Gideon nodded toward the bed. Keep it simple. He doesn't do hugs or touch before sleep. Marin approached slowly, staying in Eli's line of sight. Hey, Eli, good night. Eli's eyes were on the ceiling, tracking the moving stars, but his hand came up, made that dump truck gesture again. Big trucks, big jobs, Marin said softly, remembering the show's tagline. Eli's humming pitch changed, went lower, calmer. His eyes finally flickered toward her, just for a second, before returning to the stars. Good night, she said again, and left the room. Gideon was in the hallway, looking like he'd witnessed something impossible. None of the others ever... He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. I just said good night. No, you spoke his language. You referenced something that matters to him. You didn't make it about yourself or try to force traditional affection. Gideon leaned against the wall, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked close to breaking. Do you understand how rare that is? How many people have tried and failed to connect with him? I'm not trying to connect. I'm just being consistent, showing up, doing what I said I'd do. That is connecting for him. Consistency is love in his world. Gideon pushed off the wall. Thank you. For what? For staying, for trying, for not running. He started toward his own room, then stopped. The custody hearing is in 7 weeks. Adrian's lawyers are going to try to prove this marriage is fake, that you're just here for money, that Eli means nothing to you. You should prepare for that. How do I prepare to defend something that's technically true? I am just here because of money. Initially, anyway. Initially. But what about now? His eyes held hers. What are you here for now, Marin? She thought about Eli's hand making that dump truck sign, about the way he'd paused by her chair, about the tiny crack in the wall he'd built around himself. She thought about Gideon singing off-key at midnight, about the way his whole body oriented toward his son, about the loneliness of fighting a battle nobody else understood. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I'm still here. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Gideon said quietly. And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the hallway with a wedding ring on her finger and a purpose she was only beginning to understand. 3 weeks into the marriage, Marin woke at 2 a.m. to screaming that made her blood freeze. Not Eli's usual waking cry, but something primal and terrified that cut through the walls like a knife. She was out of bed and in the hallway before she'd fully registered moving. Gideon's door was already open, his room empty. Light spilled from Eli's doorway, and she could hear Gideon's voice underneath the screaming, low, steady, trying to cut through the panic. Marin stopped at the threshold. Eli was on the floor, rocking violently, his hands clawing at his pajama shirt like it was burning him. Gideon was on his knees a few feet away, not touching, just present, talking in that relentless, calm voice. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe. I'm right here. It's just the seam. We can fix it. We can fix it." But Eli wasn't hearing him. His eyes were wide and unseeing, and the sound coming from him was pure animal distress. Marin's hospice training kicked in. She'd seen panic attacks, night terrors, the kind of fear that bypassed rational thought entirely. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Gideon didn't look at her. "Seam in his shirt. It's rubbing wrong. He woke up and it was... This is bad. This is really bad. Can you get the shirt off?" "Not when he's like this. If I touch him, it'll get worse." Marin moved into the room slowly, staying low, making herself small and non-threatening. Eli's eyes didn't track her. He was too far gone. She positioned herself where he could see her in his peripheral vision and started humming. Not a song, just a tone. Low, steady, matching the rhythm of his rocking. "What are you doing?" Gideon's voice was strained. "Something I used to do with dementia patients. Just give me a minute." She kept humming, kept the tone constant, and slowly Eli's rocking started to sync with it. His screaming dropped in pitch, still there, but not quite so sharp. Marin reached out, not toward him, but toward one of his stuffed trucks on the floor. She picked it up, held it where he could see it, and made that dump truck gesture he'd taught her, arms wide, then together. Eli's hand stopped clawing at his shirt. His eyes found the truck, and for a second the panic cracked. "That's it," Marin murmured, still humming between words. "Big trucks. You remember big trucks." She set the truck down and picked up another one. Made a different gesture. She was guessing now, improvising, but Eli's breathing was slowing. Gideon was staring at her like she'd performed a miracle, but she kept her focus on Eli. "Gideon," she said softly, "I'm going to distract him. You get the shirt. If I touch him, he's coming down." Another 30 seconds. Watch his breathing. She picked up a third truck, made up another gesture, and started humming again. Eli's eyes were tracking the trucks now, his body still tense but not locked in that terrible cycle. His breathing hitched, steadied, hitched again. Gideon moved in fast and efficient, pulled the offending shirt over Eli's head in one smooth motion, and immediately replaced it with a different one from a drawer that apparently held backups. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds, and then he was retreating again, giving Eli space. Eli's hands came up, touched the new shirt, felt the seamless interior. The screaming stopped. He was still breathing hard, still trembling, but the worst had passed. "You're okay," Gideon said, his voice rough. "You're okay now." Eli crumpled forward, exhausted, and this time when Gideon reached for him, he allowed it. Let himself be pulled into his father's lap, his face pressed against Gideon's shoulder. Gideon's hand moved in slow circles on his back, and he started singing, that same off-key lullaby, over and over. Marin stayed where she was, not wanting to intrude on the moment, but Eli's hand snaked out from where he was curled against Gideon, fingers opening and closing in her direction, not quite reaching, but asking. "He wants you closer," Gideon said, sounding stunned. Marin shifted over until she was sitting beside them, close enough that Eli could touch her if he wanted to. He didn't, but his hand stayed extended in her direction, opening and closing in that rhythmic pattern, and his breathing finally evened out. They sat like that for 20 minutes. Gideon singing, Eli pressed against him like he was trying to burrow into safety, Marin present but not intrusive. Eventually, Eli's eyes started to drift closed, and Gideon carefully stood, lifting his son with him. "Can you pull back the covers?" he asked Marin. She did, and Gideon laid Eli down, arranged the stuffed trucks in their specific order around him, turned on the star projector. Eli's eyes opened briefly, found Marin, and his hand made that dump truck gesture one more time before dropping to the mattress. "Sleep now," Gideon whispered. "It's over. You're safe." They left the room together, pulling the door most of the way closed. In the hallway, Gideon leaned against the wall and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders were shaking. "Hey." Marin touched his arm lightly. "He's okay. This time. But what about next time? What about when I'm not fast enough, when I don't have a backup shirt, when—" He dropped his hands, and his eyes were red-rimmed. What if I can't keep him safe from his own nervous system? You can't. Nobody can. But you can be there when it happens, and you can help him through it. And that's what you did. She kept her voice firm. How often does this happen? The meltdowns, multiple times a week. This level of distress? Maybe once a month. It's unpredictable. He pushed off the wall, ran his hands through his hair. How did you know what to do? I didn't. I was guessing. Maren shrugged. But I've seen people in crisis before. The humming sometimes helps, gives them something to focus on outside the panic. The trucks were just following his lead. He responds to them, so I used them. You shouldn't have had to deal with that. Why not? I live here. This is part of living here. She met his eyes. Unless you want me to stay in my room when things get hard. Pretend I don't hear it. No, I just... He looked exhausted, wrung out, older than his 40-odd years. The others complained, said they couldn't sleep, that it was unreasonable to expect them to function with constant disruptions. Number 5 lasted 6 days and spent the last 2 wearing earplugs and sleeping in the guest house. There's a guest house? At the edge of the property. She moved there the second night after Eli had a meltdown during dinner. Threw his plate because the peas touched the carrots. Gideon's laugh was bitter. She acted like he'd attacked her, left the next morning. Maren thought about the woman's fear versus the reality. A small child overwhelmed by sensory input, not violent, just desperate. Did any of them even try? Number 2 did. She lasted the longest, almost a full week. But she kept trying to implement her own routines. Thought she could fix him with the right schedule and enough positive reinforcement. She was a child psychologist, actually, very confident in her methods. Let me guess. Her methods didn't account for autism. She treated him like a behavioral problem instead of a neurodevelopmental difference. Kept trying to force eye contact, insisted on hugs, used food as rewards. Gideon's jaw clenched. I came home one day to find Eli in full meltdown because she'd taken away his trucks until he used his words. He doesn't have words. He has trucks and gestures and humming, and that's how he communicates. What did you do? Gave him back his trucks and told her to pack. She threatened to report me for running an unstable household. I reminded her about the NDA and suggested she leave before I called my lawyers. He rubbed his face. That was 4 months ago. I'd been working up the nerve to try again when Adrian filed for custody. They stood in the quiet hallway, and Maren could feel the weight of what he was carrying. Years of fighting alone, of being the only one who saw his son as a person instead of a problem. No wonder he looked so tired. No wonder he'd armored himself so thoroughly. You should sleep, she said. I'll listen for Eli. If he wakes up again, I'll come get you. You don't have to do that. I know, but I'm awake anyway, and you look like you're about to fall over. She gestured toward his room. Go, I'll keep watch. Gideon hesitated, and she could see him wanting to argue, to maintain control, to not need help, but exhaustion won. If he wakes up, I'll get you immediately. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm just trying to let you sleep for a few hours. He nodded slowly and retreated to his room. Maren went back to her own bed, but left the door open, listening. Around 4, she heard Eli stir, heard soft sounds that might turn into distress. She was halfway to his door when Gideon appeared, moving like a ghost, already there. They made eye contact across the hallway. Gideon mouthed, "Thank you," and disappeared into his son's room. Maren heard the low murmur of his voice, the same lullaby, and eventually silence. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just lay there thinking about a 4-year-old who communicated in gestures and a father who'd built his entire life around understanding them. The next morning, Patricia cornered her in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. I heard what happened last night. News travels fast. Sophie has the Monitor app on her phone. She called me. Patricia poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one across to Maren. That was well done. I didn't do anything special. You stayed calm during a crisis. You adapted to Eli's needs instead of trying to force a solution, and you gave Mr. Vale permission to rest. In this household, that's extraordinary. Patricia's expression was unreadable. The custody evaluation is in 4 weeks. There will be a home visit, interviews with staff, observation of Eli's daily routines. Adrian's lawyers will be looking for any evidence of instability or inadequate care. And they'll find a child who has meltdowns and a father who's exhausted. That doesn't look good. No. But they'll also find a household that functions. a child who's cared for with extraordinary attention to his needs, and a marriage that, while unconventional, provides stability. Patricia sipped her coffee. The question is whether you can maintain consistency for 4 more weeks without breaking. I don't break easily. Everyone breaks eventually, Miss Bell. The question is what happens when you do? Marin thought about that conversation later, during breakfast, watching Eli methodically eat his waffle squares while Gideon reviewed something on his tablet. The household moved around them in its careful choreography. Sophie preparing for the morning's activities, Martin already planning lunch, Patricia managing schedules and logistics. It struck her how much infrastructure it took to care for one small human. How many people, how much money, how much relentless organization. Most families didn't have these resources. Most parents of autistic children were drowning, fighting schools and insurance companies and society's expectations all alone. Gideon looked up, caught her staring. What? Just thinking about how much work this is. All of it. It's worth it. No hesitation, no doubt. I know, but it shouldn't be this hard. The world should make more room. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Yes, it should. That afternoon, while Eli was having quiet time, Gideon asked Marin to join him in his office. She found him at his desk, surrounded by papers, looking grim. Adrian's lawyers requested an emergency hearing, he said without preamble. They're claiming new evidence that makes the current custody arrangement dangerous for Eli. Marin's stomach dropped. What evidence? They somehow got medical records from the ER visit with wife number 3, the one who thought he was having a seizure. Gideon's thoughts were clenched on the desk. They're arguing that Eli's meltdowns constitute a medical emergency that I'm not equipped to handle, and that the frequency of these incidents proves he needs institutional care. That's insane. Meltdowns aren't medical emergencies. No, but to people who don't understand autism, it looks like seizures or psychotic episodes or violence. The ER doctor noted extreme agitation and inability to communicate. Adrian's team is twisting it into evidence of severe disability that requires specialized facilities. When's the hearing? 2 weeks. They moved it up. He looked at her, and she saw fear underneath the anger. They're going to use every moment of Eli's worst days against me. Every meltdown, every sleepless night, every routine that looks obsessive to outsiders. They'll paint this house as chaotic and me as overwhelmed and you as... He stopped. As a hired caretaker at best, a gold digger at worst. Marin finished the sentence. I know. I've been preparing for it. How do you prepare for someone trying to prove your entire life is a lie? By making it true. She sat across from him. We have 2 weeks. Tell me what the evaluators will be looking for, and we'll give it to them. Over the next few days, the household shifted into something that felt like preparing for battle. Patricia created detailed schedules and documentation of Eli's routines. Sophie compiled videos showing his progress, his communication attempts, his moments of joy. Martin prepared meal plans that demonstrated nutritional awareness and accommodation of sensory needs. And Marin became more deeply embedded in Eli's daily life. She started joining his therapy sessions, speech therapy twice a week, occupational therapy 3 times a week. The therapists were cautious at first, protective of their small client, but they warmed up when they saw her watching without interfering, learning without demanding. He's doing the hand-over-hand activity better today, the occupational therapist, a woman named Darcy, noted during one session. Eli was working on stacking blocks with Darcy's hands gently guiding his. Has something changed at home? Marin's been practicing with him, Gideon said. He was always present for therapy sessions, always watching, always learning alongside the professionals. The consistency helps. Children like Eli thrive on predictable relationships. Darcy smiled at Marin. How long have you been in his life? 3 weeks? Really? He's already including you in his routines. That's significant progress. She released Eli's hands, let him continue stacking on his own. He managed 4 blocks before knocking them down deliberately and laughing, a sound that was pure joy, startling and beautiful. Marin felt her chest tighten. This was what people missed when they only saw the meltdowns and the struggles. They missed the moments when Eli was simply a happy child, delighting in cause and effect, in the satisfaction of mastery. After the session, while Gideon was talking to Darcy about goals for the next month, Eli wandered over to where Marin was sitting. He didn't look at her, but he pressed one of his blocks into her hand, not giving it to her exactly, sharing the experience. She pressed it back to his hand gently. He took it, hummed his three-note pattern, and wandered back to his toy bin. He's never done that with the other wives, Sophie murmured from behind her. Never shared his space or his things. Maybe he knows I'm not going anywhere. Or maybe he just likes you. That night, for the first time, Eli reached for Marin's hand during the bedtime routine. Not a hug, not prolonged contact, just his small fingers wrapping around two of hers for maybe 5 seconds before letting go. Gideon saw it happen and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Later, after Eli was asleep, Gideon found her in the library again. She'd taken to spending her evenings there, reading everything she could find about autism, about custody law, about nonverbal communication. "You're turning into an expert," he observed, gesturing at the stack of books beside her chair. "Hardly. I'm just trying not to be completely useless." "You're not useless." He sat in the chair across from her, and she noticed he'd brought 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered her one. "You've done more in 3 weeks than I had any right to expect." "I've just shown up." "That's not exactly heroic." "In my experience, showing up is the hardest part." He sipped his drink, studied her. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "Why aren't you married? Before this, I mean. Why was there no one?" Marin considered deflecting, but they'd moved past polite evasions. "Because men don't see me. I've always been invisible in that way. Too fat, too plain, too busy with unglamorous work. The few times someone did show interest, it was always because they wanted a caretaker, not a partner. Someone to manage their lives and ask nothing in return." "That sounds lonely." "It was practical. I didn't have time for loneliness." She met his eyes. "What about you? After your wife died, why didn't you find someone real, someone who actually wanted to be here?" "Because no one actually wanted to be here, not once they understood what it meant." His voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the hurt underneath. "I had relationships at first, women who said they understood, who claimed they wanted a ready-made family, but they all left eventually. Usually within a few months. One lasted almost a year." "What happened?" "She gave me an ultimatum. Either Eli went to a residential program where he could get proper care, or she was leaving. She genuinely believed she was helping, that I was being selfish by keeping him home." He stared into his glass. "I chose Eli. I'll always choose Eli." "Good." He looked up, surprised. "Most people think I'm unreasonable, that I'm letting my son dictate my entire life. Most people don't understand that love sometimes looks like sacrifice, that choosing someone's well-being over your own comfort isn't martyrdom, it's just love." Marin set down her book. "My mother used to say that you show who you really are by who you show up for when it's hard. You show up for Eli every single day, every single night. That's not unreasonable. That's just being a good father." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "The custody evaluator is coming next week, Thursday. They'll observe morning routines, interview staff, watch how Eli and I interact, how we all interact. Then we'll show them exactly what this house is. Not perfect, but functional. Not easy, but full of love. They're going to ask about our relationship, about the marriage." "I know. What will you say?" Marin thought about it. "The truth. That we got married for legal reasons. That I'm here because of my brother's debt. But that what I've found here is worth more than whatever I expected to find." "Is it?" His eyes were intent on hers. "Worth more?" She could have deflected, could have kept it light. But Gideon had been nothing but honest with her, even when the honesty was brutal. He deserved the same. "Yes," she said quietly. "I came here thinking I'd endure a year of difficulty for Jamie's sake. What I found instead was purpose, something worth doing, someone worth showing up for." She paused. "Two someones, actually." His expression shifted, went carefully neutral. "Marin, I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I know what this is. I know the contract, the boundaries, the reality. But I also know that I care about what happens to Eli, and I care about whether you're sleeping and eating and surviving this fight. That's allowed, isn't it? To care?" "It's more than allowed. It's—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with words. "I didn't expect this. Didn't expect you. I thought I was hiring help, essentially, someone to play a role. And instead you got someone who won't stay in the guest house when things get hard? Instead, I got someone who hums to my son during meltdowns and reads textbooks at midnight and makes him laugh with dump truck gestures. Gideon's voice was rough. Someone who sees him instead of just managing him. The moment stretched between them, fragile and complicated. Maren felt something shifting, the boundaries they'd established getting blurry. She didn't know what to do with it, this feeling that was more than obligation, but not quite what she'd call romantic. It was too grounded in exhaustion and crisis, too tied to a child's needs and a father's desperation. But it was real. Whatever it was real. The moment broke when they heard Eli cry out upstairs. Both of them were on their feet instantly, moving toward the stairs. But the cry didn't escalate, just a brief sound, then silence. Probably just repositioning in his sleep, Gideon said, but he still went up to check. Maren followed because that's what she did now. They stood together in Eli's doorway, watching him sleep surrounded by his trucks, the star projector painting light across his peaceful face. He looks so normal when he's sleeping, Gideon murmured. People don't believe me when I tell them how hard it is. They see photos of him like this and think I'm exaggerating. People are idiots. That surprised a laugh out of him, quiet, so as not to wake Eli, but genuine. You say that a lot. Because it's frequently true. They went back downstairs, and the rest of the evening passed in comfortable quiet. Maren read while Gideon worked on his laptop, and it felt almost domestic, almost like they were actually married instead of two people performing a legal arrangement. When she finally went to bed around 11, she lay awake thinking about custody evaluators and emergency hearings, and all the ways this fragile thing they were building could fall apart. But she also thought about Eli's hand in hers, about Gideon's rare laugh, about the way this strange household had become something that felt almost like home. She'd come here expecting darkness and scandal. What she'd found instead was just life, messy and hard and occasionally beautiful, full of people doing their best with impossible circumstances. And for the first time in years, Maren felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The week before the evaluator's visit was tense. Patricia drilled everyone on what to say and what not to say. Sophie organized documentation of Eli's progress. Martin prepared meals that would photograph well. And Gideon barely slept, running through scenarios and worst-case outcomes until Maren finally told him to stop. You're spiraling, she said one night, finding him at 2 a.m. in his office, surrounded by legal briefs. This isn't helping. I can't stop thinking about what happens if we lose. If they take him away and put him somewhere that doesn't understand him, where he's just a problem to be managed. We're not going to lose. You don't know that. No, but I know that panicking at 2 a.m. won't change the outcome. Come on. She held out her hand. You need sleep. He looked at her hand like it was a foreign object. I can't sleep. Then at least lie down. Close your eyes. Let your body rest, even if your brain won't. When he didn't move, she added, Please, you're no good to Eli if you collapse from exhaustion. That got through to him. He stood, let her lead him out of the office and up the stairs. At his bedroom door, he paused. Thank you for caring, for staying. Stop thanking me for basic human decency. But she squeezed his hand before letting go. Try to rest. Tomorrow's going to be long. She was right about that. The evaluator, a woman named Dr. Chen, arrived at 8 a.m. with a clipboard, a tablet, and an expression that gave away nothing. She observed breakfast, Eli eating his waffle squares in their precise pattern, Gideon guiding without controlling, Maren present but not intrusive. She took notes constantly. Then came the interviews. Dr. Chen spoke with Patricia, with Sophie, with Martin. She asked about routines, about Eli's needs, about the household's ability to meet them. Maren could hear some of it from where she sat with Eli in the playroom, keeping him occupied while the adults talked about his life as if he weren't a person but a case study. When it was Maren's turn, Dr. Chen's questions were pointed. How long have you known Mr. Vale? About 6 weeks. And you married him after knowing him for 3 weeks? Yes. Why? Maren had practiced this answer, but sitting across from Dr. Chen's sharp eyes, she abandoned the script. Because my brother made terrible choices, and I was offered a way to save him from the consequences. It wasn't romantic. It was transactional. And now? Now I live here. I participate in Eli's care. I'm learning what it means to be part of his world. Do you love Mr. Vale? The question was designed to trap her. If she said yes, it would sound like a lie. If she said no, it would prove the marriage was fake. I respect him, Marin said carefully. I admire how he fights for his son. I care about both of them. Whether that's love or not, I don't know. But it's real. Dr. Chen made a note. And if you could leave tomorrow with no financial penalty, would you? Marin thought about Eli's hand in hers, about Gideon singing off-key at midnight, about the way this house had become something more than a prison sentence. No, she said, I wouldn't. Why not? Because I made a commitment. Because Eli is starting to trust me, and I won't betray that trust. Because she stopped, then figured there was no point in holding back. Because I spent 10 years watching people die, and I got tired of endings. This is something that's fighting to stay alive, and I want to be part of that fight. Dr. Chen's expression didn't change, but she underlined something on her clipboard. Thank you, Mrs. Vale. That will be all. The rest of the evaluation passed in a blur. Observation of therapy sessions, review of medical records, more notes and photographs, and clinical assessment. By the time Dr. Chen left at 5 in the evening, the entire household felt wrung out. Gideon found Marin in the library. How did it go? Your interview? I told her the truth. Which version of the truth? The complicated one. She looked up at him. That we got married for practical reasons, but that I've chosen to stay for real ones. I don't know if it helped. It's more than the others could have said. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Thank you for being honest, for not just telling them what they wanted to hear. Would you have wanted me to lie? No, I'm just grateful you didn't. He was quiet for a moment. Whatever happens, whatever, doctor, Chen's report says, I want you to know that having you here has made this bearable. You've given Eli stability and given me... He paused, searching for words. Hope. That maybe we're not as doomed as I thought. Marin didn't know what to say to that, so she just reached over and took his hand. He held on like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world, and they sat like that until they heard Eli calling for dinner in his wordless way. A specific hum that meant hungry, that meant routine, that meant he needed them both. They stood together and went to him, and Marin thought that maybe this was enough. Maybe love didn't have to be grand gestures and perfect moments. Maybe it could just be showing up, day after day, holding hands in the dark, and answering when a small voice called. Maybe that was more than enough. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Marin was helping Eli sort blocks by color. Gideon's phone rang, and she watched his face go from tense to stone as he listened to whatever his lawyer was saying. He ended the call, stood there for a moment just staring at nothing, then looked at Marin with eyes that had gone completely flat. The hearing's tomorrow. They moved it up again. Sophie's hand stilled on the toy bin she was organizing. That's not possible. We were supposed to have another week. Adrian's team argued that every day Eli remains in an unstable environment constitutes ongoing harm. The judge agreed to an emergency session. Gideon's voice was carefully controlled, but Marin could see the panic underneath. We're going to court tomorrow at 9, and whatever the judge decides happens immediately. What does that mean, immediately? It means if we lose, they take him that day. Adrian's already got a facility lined up, someplace upstate that specializes in severe cases. He said the words like they were poison. They'll have transport ready, paperwork prepared. Eli could be gone by tomorrow afternoon. The block Eli had been holding clattered to the floor. He made a distressed sound, not quite a cry, but close, and Marin realized he was picking up on the tension in the room. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, and picked up the block. Blue, she said softly, placing it in the blue pile. See? Blue goes here. Eli's hands were fluttering near his face, stress evident in every movement. Gideon knelt beside him, but his own anxiety was too loud, too visible. Eli pulled away from him, humming in a pitch that meant distress. I'm making it worse, Gideon said, standing abruptly. I need to call the lawyer back, go over the strategy, prepare. He was already moving toward his office, already retreating into the only thing he could control, preparation. Sophie followed him, leaving Marin alone with Eli. The boy was rocking now, that repetitive motion that meant his world felt too big, too chaotic. Maren sat on the floor, not touching him, just present. She started humming that low tone she'd used during his meltdown, and gradually Eli's rocking synced with it. They sat like that for almost an hour. Eli cycled through his calming behaviors, rocking, humming, lining up trucks in precise rows. Maren just existed in his space, a constant presence that demanded nothing. Eventually, his distress faded enough that he picked up a block and pressed it into her hand. Their routine, their communication. She pressed it back gently, and Eli's humming shifted to his three-note pattern. Calmer now, present. Patricia found them like that at noon. Mr. Vale is in his office with the lawyers. They'll be there all day, probably into the night. Martin's prepared lunch for you and Eli. What about Gideon? He won't eat. He never does when he's like this. Patricia's expression was grim. I've worked for this family for 12 years. I've seen Mr. Vale face hostile board meetings, business collapses, the death of his wife. I've never seen him as afraid as he is right now. Because all those other things he could fight with money and lawyers and strategy, this is different. This is his child. The only thing that actually matters. Patricia watched Eli carefully stack his blocks. You should know, Adrian Crowe called this morning, before the lawyer did. He wanted to speak with Mr. Vale. About what? He offered to drop the custody suit entirely if Mr. Vale agreed to sign over control of Eli's trust fund. $10 million in exchange for leaving Eli where he is. Maren's stomach turned. That's extortion. That's desperation. Adrian's drowning in debt from bad investments. He needs that money, and he'll use Eli to get it. Patricia's voice was tight with controlled rage. Mr. Vale refused, obviously. Told Adrian that if he wanted war, he'd get it. So Adrian escalated, pushed for an emergency hearing. Exactly. He's betting that the judge will see a single father, a disabled child, a household in chaos, and make the easy choice. Take the child, put him somewhere safe. Let Adrian manage the money until Eli's 25. Except Eli would be destroyed by that. Ripped from everyone he knows, locked in a facility that treats him like a problem instead of a person. Maren felt fury rising in her chest. This isn't about Eli's welfare. It's about money and control. Well, welcome to family court, where the child's best interest is whatever the lawyers can convince a judge it is. Patricia straightened. You'll need to testify tomorrow. As his stepmother, you have standing. Be ready. The afternoon crawled by in agonizing slowness. Maren kept Eli to his routines, lunch at noon, quiet time from 1 to 3, his construction show on repeat, playground time at 4. She didn't see Gideon at all until after Eli's bedtime, when she found him still in his office, surrounded by papers and looking like he hadn't moved in hours. Have you eaten anything? She asked from the doorway. Not hungry. That wasn't the question. She came in, set down the plate Martin had prepared. Eat. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. I can't. His hands were shaking slightly. Every time I think about tomorrow, about what could happen, I can't. He stopped, pressed his palms flat on the desk. They're going to take him, Maren. I've read the briefs, looked at the precedents. Judges favor institutional care for severely disabled children, especially when there's money to pay for it. They'll call it appropriate services and professional oversight. And it won't matter that he'd be miserable, that he needs consistency and familiar people and routines that don't change. You don't know what the judge will decide. I know the statistics. I know that single fathers lose custody more often than married couples, that autistic children get institutionalized at higher rates than any other disability, that money and lawyers only get you so far when the system is designed to warehouse people who don't fit. His voice cracked. I know that I might have to watch them take my son tomorrow, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Maren had never seen him like this, armor completely gone, fear naked and raw. She moved around the desk, pulled him up from his chair, and wrapped her arms around him. He went rigid for a second, then collapsed into her, his face pressed against her shoulder, his whole body shaking. I can't lose him, he said into her sweater. I can't. You won't. We won't. She held him tighter. This man who'd fought alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone else in the foxhole with him. Tomorrow, we're going to walk into that courtroom, and we're going to show them the truth. Not the version Adrian's lawyers are selling, but the real truth. That Eli has a father who would burn the world down before letting him be hurt, and a home that's built around his needs, and people who see him as a person instead of a problem. What if that's not enough? Then we fight harder. We appeal. We make so much noise they can't ignore us. She pulled back enough to look at him. But I don't think it'll come to that. I think the judge is going to see what I see. A man who loves his son more than anything, who's created a life that works for both of them, who's not perfect but is doing everything right. Gideon's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. How are you so sure? Because I've seen you with him. I've watched you learn his language, respect his boundaries, fight for his right to exist exactly as he is. That's not something you can fake. That's love, and anyone with eyes can see it. He held her gaze for a long moment, then pulled her close again. They stood like that in the quiet office, and Marin felt something shift between them, something that had been building for weeks finally crystallizing into clarity. This wasn't just about the contract anymore. Wasn't just about staying for Eli or fulfilling an obligation. She cared about this broken, brilliant man who'd been fighting alone for too long, cared about him in ways that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with the way he sang off-key at midnight and smiled when Eli made progress and looked at his son like he was the entire world. "Marin," Gideon said quietly, his voice rough, "if this goes badly tomorrow, if they take him, I need you to know that you don't have to stay. The contract becomes void if custody changes. You'd be free to leave and I'd still pay off your brother's debt. Stop." "I'm serious. You came here for a specific arrangement, and if that arrangement ends, I said stop." She pulled back, made him look at her. "I'm not leaving. Contract or no contract, custody or no custody, I'm staying. Do you understand? I'm not one of the others. I don't run when things get hard." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Why would you stay if there's nothing in it for you?" "Because there is something in it for me. You, Eli. This strange, difficult life that somehow became mine." She touched his face, felt the stubble rough under her palm. "I didn't expect this, didn't plan for it, but somewhere between the meltdowns and the therapy sessions and learning to speak in dump truck gestures, I stopped being here because I had to and started being here because I wanted to." Gideon's hand came up to cover hers. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." She managed to smile. "Now eat something, get a few hours of sleep if you can, and tomorrow we'll go to war." He nodded slowly, and she left him there with the plate of food and the impossible task of resting before the fight of his life. Morning came too fast. Marin was up at 5, dressed in the most professional outfit she owned, a navy suit she'd bought for her mother's funeral and never worn since. She found Gideon already awake, standing in Eli's doorway watching his son sleep. "I keep thinking about what happens if I don't come back here tonight," he said quietly. "If the judge rules against me and they take him directly from court, he won't understand. Won't know why I'm not there for bedtime, for breakfast, for any of it. Then we make sure you come back." Marin stood beside him. "Both of us." They woke Eli together, went through his morning routine with extra care. Breakfast was quiet. Even Sophie and Patricia seemed subdued, the weight of the day pressing down on everyone. Eli sensed the tension, his humming more agitated than usual, his movements jerky. "Hey," Marin said softly, kneeling beside his chair. "Big trucks, remember? Big trucks, big jobs." Eli's eyes found hers, and he made the dump truck gesture. She made it back, and some of the tension left his small shoulders. Gideon watched them with an expression that was equal parts grief and gratitude. At 8:15, the car arrived. Sophie would stay with Eli. She was the person he tolerated best after Gideon and Marin. Patricia was coming to court as a witness. Martin had prepared a detailed report on Eli's dietary needs and routines that would be submitted as evidence. Marin kissed the top of Eli's head, something she'd never done before, but it felt necessary, like marking a moment. "We'll be back soon, buddy. Sophie's going to take care of you." Eli didn't acknowledge the words, but his hand reached out and caught hers for a second before letting go. The gesture felt like a benediction. The courthouse was downtown, a gray building that looked designed to crush hope. Adrian Crowe was already there with his legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits, plus a woman Marin didn't recognize. Adrian himself was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of face that photographed well and hid cruelty behind charm. "Gideon," he said, his voice full of false warmth, We don't have to do this. The offer still stands. Sign over the trust management, and I'll withdraw the petition. Go to hell, Adrian. Gideon's voice was ice. I'm trying to do what's best for Eli. That boy needs professional care, structure, a place where people are trained to handle his issues. His issues? Marin stepped forward before she could stop herself. He's 4 years old. He's not a collection of issues. Adrian's eyes swept over her, dismissive. And you must be the newest Mrs. Vale. How long do you think you'll last? A month? 2? The others all ran once they realized what living in that house actually meant. The others weren't me. No, they were women with actual credentials and social standing. You're a hospice worker who sold herself for her brother's gambling debts. His smile was cruel. Did you really think Gideon married you for any reason other than desperation? You're a prop in a legal strategy, nothing more. Gideon's hand found Marin's arm, pulling her back before she could respond. Don't engage, that's what he wants. They moved past Adrian into the courtroom, where their lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, was already setting up. The judge is Patricia Walsh, fair, generally progressive on disability issues, but a stickler for protocol and evidence. Don't volunteer information, answer only what's asked, and stay calm no matter what Adrian's team throws at you. The hearing started promptly at 9. Judge Walsh was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to opening statements from both sides. Adrian's team painting a picture of a severely disabled child in an unstable home with an overwhelmed single father and a suspiciously sudden marriage. Rebecca countering with documentation of Eli's progress, his therapy reports, the carefully structured household. Then came the witnesses. Adrian's team called the ER doctor who'd seen Eli during the museum incident. He described a child in severe distress, uncommunicative, unresponsive, exhibiting behavior consistent with seizures or psychosis. Under cross-examination, Rebecca got him to admit he had no specialized training in autism and had never seen Eli before or since. They called a child psychologist who'd never met Eli, but testified about the benefits of specialized residential programs for severely autistic children. Rebecca shredded that testimony by pointing out that every study the psychologist cited was about adults, not 4-year-olds, and none addressed the trauma of removing a child from their primary caregiver. Then Adrian himself took the stand. He was polished, sympathetic, playing the concerned uncle perfectly. I loved my sister. When she died, I promised myself I'd look after her son, but Gideon won't accept that Eli needs more than he can provide. The boy barely communicates, has violent meltdowns, can't function in normal environments. He deserves professional care, not a parade of temporary stepmothers and a father who's too proud to admit he's in over his head. Mr. Crow, Rebecca said during cross-examination, isn't it true that you approached Mr. Vale 6 months ago asking to be named co-trustee of Eli's $10 million trust fund? Adrian's expression flickered. I offered to help manage it, yes, as family. And when Mr. Vale refused, you immediately filed for custody? The timing was coincidental. I'd been concerned about Eli's care for months. You've seen Eli exactly 4 times in the past 3 years. Is that correct? I've been busy with my own life, but that doesn't mean... And 2 of those visits were to serve legal papers. So really, you visited your nephew socially twice in 3 years, and now you're claiming you're the appropriate guardian? Rebecca's voice was sharp. Isn't the truth that you want control of that trust fund, and Eli is just the means to get it? Objection! Adrian's lawyer was on his feet. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Judge Walsh said. Rephrase, Ms. Torres. Mr. Crow, how much money do you currently owe in personal debt? Adrian's face went hard. That's irrelevant. I'll ask again. How much debt? Objection. Relevance. Rebecca turned to the judge. Your Honor, it goes to motive. If Mr. Crow is financially desperate, it undermines his claim that this is about Eli's welfare. Judge Walsh considered. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Crow. Approximately $2 million. Adrian bit off the words. And you believe that managing Eli's trust fund would solve your financial problems? I believe I could provide better care for my nephew than a man who can't keep a wife for more than a week and just married a stranger to make himself look stable. The words hung into the courtroom. Judge Walsh's eyes moved to Marin, assessing. We'll hear from Mrs. Vale after the lunch recess. This court is adjourned until 1 o'clock. The break was brutal. Marin couldn't eat, could barely think. Gideon was silent, staring at nothing, and Rebecca was on her phone coordinating with someone back at the house. When they reconvened at 1, the courtroom felt smaller, the air thicker. Patricia testified first, detailing Eli's routines, his progress, the careful structure of the household. Adrian's lawyer tried to make her sound like hired help defending her employer, but Patricia's dignity and precision made it clear she was testifying to facts, not loyalty. Then Darcy, the occupational therapist, described Eli's development, his growing comfort with routines, his emerging communication skills. He's made remarkable progress in the past 2 months. Something in his environment changed, became more stable, more consistent. Whatever Mr. Vale is doing, it's working. And if Eli were removed from his current environment, Rebecca asked, it would be catastrophic. Children like Eli need consistency above all else. Disrupting his routines, removing his primary caregiver, placing him in an unfamiliar setting, it would likely result in severe regression. We could lose months or years of progress. Adrian's lawyer tried to argue that a professional facility would provide even better consistency, but Darcy shut it down. Facilities have staff turnover, rotating shifts, standardized routines that don't account for individual needs. Eli has a father who's learned his specific communication style, who knows exactly what soothes him and what triggers distress. You can't replicate that with even the best trained staff. Then it was Marin's turn. She walked to the stand on legs that felt like water, swore to tell the truth, and sat down facing a courtroom full of people who thought they knew her story. Rebecca started gently. Mrs. Vale, how did you meet your husband? I was approached by his representatives with an offer. My brother had gambling debts he couldn't pay. In exchange for marrying Gideon and staying married for a year, the debts would be cleared. A murmur went through the courtroom. Judge Walsh's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. So this was a business arrangement? Initially, yes. Are you still being paid to be Mrs. Vale? No, the debt was paid when we married. I stay now because I choose to. Why? Marin looked at Gideon, saw him watching her with an expression that was desperate and hopeful and terrified all at once. She turned back to Rebecca. Because I came here expecting to endure a year of difficulty, and what I found instead was a child who needed someone to stay, and a father who'd been fighting alone for too long. I found purpose. She paused, the words catching. I found a family, even if it doesn't look like what anyone expected. Adrian's lawyer stood for cross-examination, and his smile was predatory. Mrs. Vale, you've been married to Mr. Vale for 6 weeks. Is that correct? Yes. And in those 6 weeks, how many nights have you spent in his bed? Rebecca shot to her feet. Objection. Relevance? Your Honor, if this is truly a marriage and not a sham arrangement, the nature of their relationship is relevant. Judge Walsh frowned. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, counselor. The lawyer turned back to Marin. How many nights, Mrs. Vale? None. We have separate bedrooms. Have you ever been intimate with your husband? No. Do you love him? The question felt like a trap. Marin thought about all the easy lies she could tell, but she'd promised herself honesty. I don't know what love looks like in this situation, but I care about him deeply. I respect him. I want him to be happy and safe and to keep his son. If that's love, then yes. That's a very convenient answer for someone trying to help win a custody case. It's the truth. I came here for money. I'm staying for reasons that have nothing to do with money. You can believe that or not, but it won't change the fact that I wake up every morning and choose to be part of Eli's life. A life you knew nothing about 6 weeks ago. What qualifies you to care for a severely autistic child? 10 years of working with people everyone else had given up on. Patience. The ability to sit with someone in their worst moments and not run. The understanding that communication doesn't require words, and that different doesn't mean broken. Marin's voice was steady now, the fear burned away by anger. I'm not a specialist, I'm not a trained therapist, but I show up every single day and I learn Eli's language instead of demanding he speak mine, and I don't see him as a problem that needs solving. How touching. And when Mr. Vale's money runs out, or when this arrangement becomes too difficult, what happens then? The money is irrelevant, And difficult is just life. I don't run from difficult. Everyone runs eventually, Mrs. Vale. 7 women before you all thought they could handle it. What makes you different? Marin looked at Adrian, sitting smug at his table, then at the judge, then back at the lawyer. What makes me different is that I didn't come here for status or luxury or a powerful husband. I came here with nothing to lose and everything to gain, and what I gained was worth more than whatever I expected. So no, I won't run. Not from Eli, not from Gideon, not from this life that's hard and messy and sometimes impossible, but also full of small moments that matter more than anything else I've ever done. The lawyer tried a few more questions, but Marin could see she'd thrown him off his script. He sat down looking frustrated, and Rebecca called her final witness. Gideon took the stand, and Marin saw how much the day had cost him. He looked exhausted, wrung out, but his voice was steady as he answered Rebecca's questions about Eli's routines, his progress, the household structure. Mr. Vale, why did you marry 7 different women in 3 years? Because I was desperate. My lawyers told me a married man would have better chances in custody court, and I believed them. I thought if I could find someone willing to play the role, it would be enough. I was wrong. Why were the previous marriages unsuccessful? Because the women I chose wanted status and money, and what they got was a child with significant needs who required every ounce of attention I had. They couldn't handle being second priority, and I wouldn't compromise on that. Eli comes first. He always will. And Mrs. Vale? Is she also second priority? Gideon's eyes found Marin's. No, because she doesn't want to be first. She wants to be part of Eli's life, which means she's part of mine. It's not traditional. It's not what anyone planned, but it works. Adrian's lawyer took over, and his questions were brutal. He brought up every meltdown, every difficult moment, every time Eli had been in distress. He painted a picture of a household in chaos, a child spiraling, a father overwhelmed. Mr. Vale, isn't it true that Eli has meltdowns multiple times a week? Yes. That he can't communicate verbally? He communicates, just not with words. That he'll likely never be able to live independently? That's speculation. He's 4 years old. Nobody knows what his future holds. But the specialists you've consulted have all said his prognosis is poor, that he'll need lifelong support. They've said he'll need support, not that he can't have a meaningful life. Gideon's voice was tight. And I'll provide that support for as long as I live. Wouldn't he receive better support in a facility designed for his needs, with trained staff, structured programs, other children like him? He'd receive standardized care that doesn't account for who he is as an individual. He'd lose his home, his routines, everyone he trusts. The trauma alone would destroy any progress he's made. Or it would give him access to resources you can't provide, no matter how much money you have. Money doesn't matter. Love matters. Consistency matters. Understanding matters. And no facility can provide what he has at home. The lawyer switched tactics. Mr. Vale, are you in love with your wife? Gideon went very still. Marin watched him process the question, saw him calculating the right answer, the strategic answer. Then he looked at her again, and something in his face shifted. I didn't marry her for love. I married her because I was desperate, and she was willing. But yes, I'm in love with her. Not because she's convenient or useful, but because she sees my son as a person and sees me as more than a failure. Because she stayed when everyone else ran. Because she's made a home out of what used to just be a house. The courtroom went silent. Adrian's lawyer looked thrown, probably because the answer was too honest to be strategic. Your Honor, Rebecca said, standing, the defense rests. Mr. Vale is not a perfect father. His household is not conventional. But Eli is loved, cared for, making progress, and thriving within the structure his father has created. Removing him from that environment would constitute harm, not help. We ask that custody remain with Mr. Vale. Judge Walsh took a long moment, looking at her notes, at the evidence spread before her, at the faces of everyone involved. I'll take a 30-minute recess to review the testimony and evidence. Court is adjourned. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Marin stood in the hallway with Gideon, both of them too tense to sit. He hadn't spoken since leaving the stand, and she didn't push. Whatever he'd said in there, that he loved her, felt too big to address in a courthouse hallway with their entire future hanging in the balance. Rebecca found them at the 20-minute mark. I can't predict which way this goes. Walsh is fair, but she's also cautious. If she thinks Eli would benefit from professional care, she might rule for Adrian regardless of his motives. And if she rules against us? Gideon's voice was hollow. We appeal immediately, but that takes time, and in the interim, they take him. I know. He pressed his palms against his eyes. I can't think about that. I can't. The bailiff appeared. Judge Walsh is ready. They filed back into the courtroom, and Marin reached for Gideon's hand without thinking. He gripped it like a lifeline as they stood before the judge. Judge Walsh looked at them over her reading glasses, her expression unreadable. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented today. This is a difficult case with compelling arguments on both sides. However, my responsibility is to determine what serves the best interest of the child. Marin felt Gideon's hand trembling in hers. Mr. Crow's argument that Eli would benefit from professional residential care has some merit. The child clearly has significant needs that require specialized knowledge and consistent support. However, Judge Walsh paused and Marin's heart stopped. However, the testimony and evidence show that Eli is receiving that specialized support in his current environment. His therapists report progress. His routines are well established and effective. Most importantly, he has a primary caregiver who has devoted himself entirely to understanding and meeting his needs. Gideon's grip tightened. Mr. Crow's financial motivations, while not determinative, do raise concerns about whether his petition truly serves Eli's welfare or his own interests. Additionally, the suggestion that disrupting a 4-year-old's established attachments and routines would somehow benefit him contradicts all expert testimony on childhood development and autism care. Judge Walsh looked directly at Gideon. Mr. Vale, your household is unconventional. Your marriage is unusual. But what I see is a father who has restructured his entire life around his son's needs, a wife who has chosen to become part of that structure, and a child who is, by all accounts, progressing within an environment that understands and accommodates him. She set down her papers. Custody remains with Mr. Vale. Mr. Crow's petition is denied. Furthermore, given the evidence of financial motivation and the attempt to use emergency procedures to circumvent proper evaluation, I'm ordering that Mr. Crow cannot file another custody petition for a minimum of 2 years without demonstrating substantial change in circumstances. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and for a second no one moved. Then Gideon made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and pulled Marin into his arms so hard she couldn't breathe. We won, he said into her hair. We won. He's safe. Marin held him while he shook, while the relief and terror and exhaustion of months poured out of him. Rebecca was grinning, Patricia was wiping her eyes, and Adrian was storming out of the courtroom with his lawyers trailing behind him. They'd won. Eli was safe. The fight was over. But as Marin stood there in Gideon's arms, she realized that something else had shifted too. What he'd said on the stand, that he loved her, was out there now, real and undeniable. And her own response to those words, the way her heart had cracked open hearing them, meant she couldn't pretend anymore that this was just about contracts and obligations. This was real, all of it. The messy, complicated, impossible to define thing between them was real, and they were going to have to figure out what to do about it. But first they had to go home and tell a 4-year-old boy that his father wasn't going anywhere. They drove home in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet than the morning's journey. Gideon kept one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around Marin's, like he needed the physical proof that she was still there, that this was real. Patricia sat in the back seat, already on her phone coordinating with Sophie, making sure Eli's afternoon routine hadn't been disrupted despite the chaos. The house appeared through the trees, and Marin felt something loosen in her chest. Home. When had it become home instead of just the place where she was serving out a contract? Sophie met them at the door, Eli on her hip. The boy was agitated, his hands fluttering, his humming pitched higher than usual. The moment he saw Gideon, he lunged forward with a desperation that made Marin's throat tight. Gideon caught him, held him close, and Eli's small hands fisted in his father's shirt. Not hugging, exactly. Eli didn't do traditional affection, but clinging with every ounce of his 4-year-old strength. I'm here, buddy. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Gideon's voice was rough, and Marin saw tears tracking down his face that he didn't bother to hide. You're safe. We're all safe. Eli's humming shifted to that three-note pattern, the one that meant comfort, meant home. His eyes found Marin over Gideon's shoulder, and he reached one hand toward her. She moved closer, let his fingers wrap around two of hers, and the three of them stood there in the entrance hall like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. Sophie was crying too, and Patricia's eyes were suspiciously bright. Even Martin appeared from the kitchen, relief written all over his weathered face. "I knew you'd win," Sophie said, wiping her eyes. "I knew it." "It was close," Gideon admitted. He finally set Eli down, though he kept one hand on his son's shoulder. Too close. If the judge had been more conservative, if Adrian's lawyers had been better, but they weren't, and you won. Patricia's voice was firm. Now we move forward. Adrian can't file again for 2 years, which gives us time to solidify everything, to make this household absolutely unassailable. Eli tugged on Gideon's hand, making a gesture that Marin had learned meant he wanted his construction show. Normal routine, normal comfort. The world had tilted too far today, and he needed it to tilt back. "Yeah, okay, let's watch trucks." Gideon let himself be led toward the living room, and Marin followed because that's what she did now. She was part of the routine, part of the fabric of their days. They settled into their usual positions. Eli on the floor close to the screen, Gideon on the sofa where he could watch his son, Marin, in the armchair to the side. The familiar theme music started and some of the tension finally bled out of the room. Eli's humming synced with the narration, his hands making those truck gestures, and gradually his agitation faded into focus. Halfway through the third repetition of the same episode, Gideon spoke quietly. "What I said in court, about loving you, I meant it." Marin's heart kicked against her ribs. "That wasn't just for the judge." "No, it was, I didn't plan to say it, but he asked, and I couldn't lie." He was staring at the television, not looking at her. "I know this wasn't supposed to be real. I know we had an arrangement, boundaries, clear expectations. But somewhere between you humming to Eli during a meltdown and you telling Adrian's lawyer that difficult is just life, I stopped pretending this was temporary." "Gideon, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know it wasn't strategy. It was truth." He finally looked at her and his eyes were raw with exhaustion and hope and fear. "I'm in love with you, Marin. Not because you're convenient or because you stayed when others ran, but because you see my son as a person and you see me as more than a failure. Because you laugh at my terrible singing and you've memorized every word of this damn construction show and you don't run from hard things." Marin's throat was tight. She thought about this past 6 weeks, about how her life had narrowed from the whole city to this house, these people, this strange family that didn't look like anything she'd imagined. She thought about waking up at 2 a.m. to check if Eli was okay, about learning to read Gideon's moods in the set of his shoulders, about the way her chest ached when she heard him singing off-key lullabies. "I didn't want this," she said quietly. "I came here for money, for Jamie. I was supposed to endure a year and leave." "I know, but I can't imagine leaving now. Can't imagine not being here when Eli wakes up, or not sitting through 15 repetitions of this show, or not—" She stopped, the words catching. "Not being with you. Even when you're stubborn and scared and so tired you can barely stand, I want to be here." Gideon stood, crossed to her chair, and pulled her up to face him. "Is that love? For you?" "I think so. I don't have a lot of experience with this. But what I feel when I look at you, when I think about you fighting for Eli, when you trust me enough to fall apart." She touched his face, felt him lean into her palm. "Yes, that's love. It's not what I expected love to look like, but it's real." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Marin kissed him back, and it felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. Terrifying, and inevitable, and right. When they pulled apart, Eli was standing a few feet away, watching them with his huge dark eyes. His expression was hard to read, but his humming had stopped. "Hey, buddy," Gideon said, his voice gentle. "You okay?" Eli looked at Marin, then at his father, then back to Marin. His hand came up and made a gesture she'd never seen before, both hands together, then pulling apart slowly, then coming back together. She didn't know what it meant, but Gideon's breath caught. That's his sign for family, he said quietly. His therapist taught it to him months ago, but he's never used it. Eli made the sign again, more deliberately, and this time his eyes held Marin's. Family. He was claiming her, in his own wordless way, making her part of the pattern that made his world make sense. Marin knelt down to his level. Yeah, buddy. Family. You, me, and your dad. We're family. Eli's hand reached out, pressed briefly against her cheek, the most deliberate touch he'd ever initiated with her. And then he was gone, back to the television, back to his trucks. But the gesture hung in the air like a benediction. Did that just happen? Marin's voice was unsteady. He claimed you, officially. Gideon pulled her back to her feet, wrapped his arms around her. You're his now, whether you like it or not. I like it, she said into his chest. I like it a lot. They stood like that while the construction show played its endless loop, while Eli hummed his patterns, while the household settled back into its rhythms. Sophie poked her head in at some point, saw them holding each other, and backed out with a knowing smile. That night, after Eli was in bed and the house had gone quiet, Gideon asked Marin if she'd come to his room. Not for sex, neither of them had the energy or the readiness for that, but just to not be alone. She followed him into a space she'd never seen before. His bedroom was sparse, almost monastic, a large bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. No personal touches except for a framed photo on the nightstand of a woman holding a baby. Gideon's late wife and infant Eli. That's Caroline, he said, following her gaze. Eli's mother. She was beautiful. She was. She was also impulsive and chaotic and completely unprepared for motherhood, especially to a child like Eli. He picked up the frame, looked at it. I loved her, but I'm not sure we would have lasted even if she'd lived. We were too different. She wanted adventure and spontaneity, and I needed structure and planning. After Eli was born, and we started realizing something was different about him, she struggled, couldn't handle the routines, the constant vigilance, the way our lives had to revolve around his needs. That must have been hard, doing it alone even when she was still here. It was. And then she died, and I was angry at her for a long time. Angry that she left. Angry that she'd been texting while driving. Angry that she never got to see who Eli would become. He set the photo down. But I've made peace with it. She loved him as much as she was capable of loving anyone. It just wasn't enough to overcome her own needs. Marin thought about that, about loving someone and still not being able to give them what they needed. Do you still love her? I love the memory of her, the version of her that existed before reality got in the way. He turned to face Marin fully. But what I feel for you is different. It's not based on fantasy or potential. It's based on you showing up every single day and choosing this life even when it's hard. That's more valuable than any grand romantic gesture. They climbed into bed together, and it felt strange and natural at the same time. Gideon pulled her against him, her back to his chest, and she could feel his exhaustion in every line of his body. Sleep, she murmured. You need to sleep. I'm afraid if I sleep, I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. That we'll have lost. That Eli will be gone. We didn't lose. Eli's safe in his room down the hall. This is real. She laced her fingers through his. I promise you, this is real. He pressed his face into her hair, and she felt him finally let go of the fear he'd been carrying for months. His breathing evened out, and for the first time since she'd arrived at this house, Marin heard him sleep soundly through the night. She woke once around 3 to check on Eli. Old habits. But he was peaceful, surrounded by his trucks, the stars projecting their patterns on his ceiling. When she returned to Gideon's room, he stirred enough to pull her back against him, and they slept tangled together until morning. The next few weeks felt like learning to breathe again after being underwater too long. The constant tension that had permeated the household since Marin arrived finally eased. Gideon laughed more, slept better, stopped looking over his shoulder for the next disaster. Patricia relaxed her hyper-vigilant scheduling. Sophie stopped walking on eggshells around routines, and Eli, in his own subtle way, bloomed. His therapist noticed it first. He's more engaged, Darcy reported during an OT session, making more eye contact, trying new activities, even attempting to imitate some sounds during speech therapy. Whatever changed in his environment, it's working. What had changed was simple. The adults in his life had stopped being afraid. Stop treating every day like a battle they might lose. The security of the custody win had given everyone permission to just live instead of constantly defending their right to live. Marin found herself settling into the role of Eli's stepmother in ways that felt less like obligation and more like choice. She learned all his gestures, could predict his needs almost as well as Gideon could. She figured out that he liked her to sit with him during breakfast but not dinner, that he tolerated her presence during playground time but not bath time, that he sought her out specifically when he was tired but wanted comfort without touch. She also learned Gideon in the same intimate way, how he took his coffee, how his left shoulder ached when he was stressed, how he needed exactly 20 minutes of silence after Eli's bedtime before he could engage in conversation. They moved around each other like dancers learning a new routine, occasionally stepping on each other's toes but mostly finding their rhythm. 3 months after the custody hearing, Marin got a call from Jamie. She almost didn't answer. They'd talked only twice since the wedding, brief and stilted conversations where he thanked her for saving him, and she tried not to resent how easily he'd let her sacrifice herself for his mistakes. "Mare," he said when she picked up, his voice rough. "I'm in rehab." She sat down hard on the library sofa. "What?" "I checked myself into a program. 30 days inpatient for gambling addiction. I'm 2 weeks in." He sounded exhausted and sober in a way she'd never heard before. "I wanted you to know. Wanted you to know that what you did, marrying that guy, giving up your whole life, I can't let that be for nothing. Jamie, I know I don't deserve your help. I know I've been a selfish asshole who's cost you everything, but I'm trying to fix it, trying to be someone worth the sacrifice you made." He paused. "How is it? The marriage? Are you surviving?" Marin thought about how to answer that. "I'm not just surviving, it's complicated, but I'm happy. Happier than I've been in years, actually." "Seriously? With some billionaire control freak and his disabled kid?" Jamie sounded skeptical. "Don't call him that. Eli's not disabled kid. He's a 4-year-old with autism who communicates in ways you'd never bother to learn." The sharpness in her voice surprised her. "And Gideon's not a control freak. He's a father doing everything in his power to protect his son." Okay, sorry." Jamie was quiet for a moment. "You sound different. Stronger, maybe. Or just different." "I am different. I have a purpose now. Something worth doing." "More worth doing than taking care of dying people?" "Different worth. Not more, just different." She softened her tone. "I'm proud of you, for going to rehab, for trying." "Don't be proud yet. I might fuck it up. Probably will." But he sounded less defeated than usual. "When I get out, can I visit, meet your husband, see this life you've built?" Marin thought about introducing Jamie to this world, her chaotic, weak little brother walking into the carefully structured household she'd become part of. But he was still her brother, still family, even if he'd been a disaster of one. "Yeah, when you're ready. But Jamie, if you relapse, if you gamble again, I can't save you a second time. This is it. You understand?" "I understand. I won't. I'm going to try really hard not to fuck this up." He took a shaky breath. "I love you, Mare. I don't say it enough, but I do." "I love you too. Even when you're being an idiot." She smiled despite herself. "Call me when you get out. We'll figure out a visit." After she hung up, she sat in the library for a while, processing. Gideon found her there an hour later, already in his pajamas, even though it was only 8. "Eli asked for you," he said. "Well, he stood outside your bedroom door humming until I figured out he wanted you. He's in bed, but I think he wants you to say goodnight." Marin followed him upstairs. Eli was indeed in bed, but he was holding one of his trucks toward the door, the universal signal that he wanted to share something. She sat on the edge of his bed, carefully, always carefully, respecting his space. "Hey, buddy, what have you got there?" Eli pressed the truck into her hand, held it there for a long moment, then took it back. His version of good night. His way of saying she mattered. "Good night, Eli. Sweet dreams about big trucks and big jobs." His humming shifted to that contented pitch, and his eyes drifted toward the star projections. Marin stood, kissed her fingers, and pressed them briefly to his forehead, the closest she could get to tucking him in, and left him to sleep. Gideon was waiting in the hallway. "Jamie called?" "How did you know?" "You have a specific expression when you're dealing with your brother, somewhere between love and exasperation. He pulled her toward his room. Everything okay? She told him about the rehab, the call, the request to visit. Gideon listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. He can visit, but not until he's been clean for at least 60 days. I won't have instability around Eli. That's fair. Marin leaned against him. Thank you for not just saying no. He's your family. That makes him part of this family. But he has to prove he's serious about changing. Gideon's arms came around her. You don't have to save him, you know. You've already done more than anyone could ask. I know, but he's trying, and that's worth something. They stood like that in the quiet hallway, and Marin thought about how far they'd all come. 3 months ago, she'd been a stranger walking into a mansion full of fear and secrets. Now she was part of the foundation, woven into the daily patterns that made this household function. 2 weeks later, Gideon surprised her by suggesting they renew their vows. Not for legal reasons, they were already married, but because he said the first wedding had been a business transaction and he wanted something real. Something that's actually about us, he explained over breakfast while Eli methodically worked through his waffle squares. Small, just family and the household staff, in the garden. Nothing fancy, just real. Marin felt tears prick her eyes. You want to marry me again. I want to marry you for the right reasons this time. Because I love you, and you love me, and we've built something worth celebrating. He reached across the table, took her hand. What do you say? I say yes. Obviously yes. They planned it for the following Saturday. Patricia coordinated despite protesting that she was house manager, not a wedding planner. Sophie helped Marin find a simple white dress that didn't feel like playing bride, but actually felt like herself. Martin planned a menu that included Eli-safe options alongside celebration food for everyone else. The morning of the ceremony, Marin woke in Gideon's bed. Their bed now, the separate bedrooms arrangement long abandoned, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, unqualified happiness. Not the kind that ignored problems or pretended life was perfect, but the kind that existed despite difficulty, that bloomed in the cracks between hard moments. Gideon was already awake, watching her with an expression that was soft and unguarded. Having second thoughts? About marrying you for real instead of for Jamie's debt? No second thoughts at all. Good. Because I'm not letting you back out now. He kissed her, morning breath and all, and she kissed him back without caring about anything except this moment, this man, this life they'd built together. The ceremony was at 2 p.m, in the garden that Martin and Patricia had somehow transformed into something beautiful without being overwhelming. Just simple white chairs, some flowers, the autumn sun warm despite the season. Eli was there, wearing a soft button-down shirt with no tags and his favorite truck in his pocket for comfort. Sophie stood with him, ready to take him inside if the stimulation became too much. Patricia was there, and Martin, and the therapists who'd worked with Eli and watched this household become a family. There was no officiant. They'd already done the legal part months ago. This was just them, saying the words they wished they'd said the first time. Gideon went first, his hands holding hers, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. The first time I married you, I was using you, trying to create an illusion of stability to save my son. I'm not proud of that. But you stayed anyway, and you turned that illusion into reality. You loved Eli when no one else could. You loved me when I was too afraid to let anyone close. You showed up every single day and chose this life even when it was hard. I don't deserve you, Marin, but I'm grateful every day that you're here. I love you, not because you're convenient or useful, but because you're you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that. Marin's throat was tight, tears streaming down her face. I came here for money, for my brother. I was supposed to endure a year and leave. But you and Eli, you gave me something I didn't even know I was looking for. Purpose, family, a reason to wake up that's about more than just survival. You trusted me with the most precious thing in your life, and that trust changed me, made me better, made me braver. I love you, Gideon. I love Eli. I love this messy, complicated life we've built, and I'm staying, not because of a contract or an obligation, but because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. They kissed, and it felt different from that first kiss in the courthouse. Less about sealing a deal and more about confirming a truth they'd both already known. When they pulled apart, everyone was crying, even Patricia, who never cried. And Eli, standing with Sophie, made that family gesture again, hands together, pulling apart, coming back together. Then he walked over to them, his steps deliberate, and pressed himself against Gideon's leg. After a moment, his hand reached out and caught Marin's, holding on for maybe 5 whole seconds before letting go. "That's the longest he's ever held contact with anyone except me," Gideon said, his voice breaking. The reception was simple. Food and conversation in the dining room, Eli eating his specially prepared meal at his specific spot. The household together in a way that felt less like employer and staff and more like extended family. They told stories, laughed, and for a few hours, the world outside the gates didn't exist. That night, after Eli was asleep and the house had quieted, Marin and Gideon sat in the library with glasses of wine, just existing in the peaceful aftermath. "I was thinking," Gideon said carefully, "about the trust fund. Eli's trust. What about it? I want to use part of it to start a foundation for families with autistic children who don't have the resources we have. To fund therapy, provide respite care, help with legal battles when families are fighting for custody or appropriate services." He looked at her. "I want Eli's money to help other kids like him, kids whose parents are drowning and don't have backup." Marin's chest felt full. "That's perfect. He'd like that, I think. Helping other kids. We could call it the Eli Vale Foundation. Make it his legacy, something that matters beyond just the money sitting in an account." Gideon set down his wine. "Would you want to be involved? Help run it? You want me to run a foundation? I want us to run it together. You understand what families need because you've been in the trenches. You know what actually helps versus what just sounds good on paper." He took her hand. "Besides, we're a team now. Everything we do together." "Then yes, absolutely yes." They talked late into the night about what the foundation could be, how it could work, the families it could help. And somewhere in that conversation, Marin realized she'd found the thing she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just a family, but a purpose that extended beyond their own walls. 6 months later, the Eli Vale Foundation opened its doors. They started small, funding therapy for 5 families, providing legal support for 2 custody cases, creating a respite care program that gave exhausted parents a break without guilt. But it grew quickly, word spreading among families who'd been fighting alone for too long. Marin interviewed every family personally, sat with parents who cried from exhaustion and relief, connected them with resources and support systems. She was good at it. The same skills she'd used in hospice care translated perfectly to this work. The ability to sit with people in their hardest moments, to see their children as people instead of problems, to understand that sometimes help just means showing up consistently. Gideon handled the business side, turning his strategic mind toward creating sustainable funding and partnerships with therapy practices and legal firms. Together, they built something that mattered. Eli, now 5, continued to progress in his own time and his own way. He started using a picture communication board, pointing to images to indicate wants and needs. He learned to tolerate more sensory experiences, though he still had his limits and his meltdowns. He made a friend, another autistic child from his therapy group, and watching them play side by side, each in their own world but somehow connected, made Marin cry. Jamie visited twice after completing rehab, awkward and trying too hard but genuinely sober. Marin could see him struggling with it, see the work it took every day not to fall back into old patterns, but he was trying, and that was enough for now. "Your life is weird," he said during his second visit, watching Eli line up trucks while Marin and Gideon prepared dinner together in the kitchen. "But it's good weird. You're happy weird." "Yeah," Marin agreed. "I am." On a Tuesday evening 1 year after the custody hearing, Marin found Gideon in Eli's room, watching their son sleep. She'd started thinking of him that way somewhere along the line. Their son, not just Gideon's. The legal adoption paperwork was sitting on Gideon's desk, waiting for her signature, making it official. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Just thinking about what my life would be if you'd run. If you'd been like the others." He pulled her against his side. "I'd have lost him. Adrian would have won, and Eli would be in some facility where nobody knows that he needs the seams cut out of his shirts and that he hates the color yellow and that he signs family when he's feeling safe. But I didn't run, and you didn't lose him, and he's right here, safe and loved and home. Because of you. Because of us." She turned to face him fully. "Stop giving me all the credit. You're the one who fought for years before I ever showed up. You're the one who learned his language, built his world, refused to give up. I just joined the fight, stayed in the foxhole with you." Gideon kissed her forehead, her cheek, her mouth. "Best decision I ever made. Marrying you. You made it for the wrong reasons." "Doesn't matter, I got the right result." He smiled, and it was the real smile she saw more often now, the one that reached his eyes and made him look younger, lighter, free from the weight of fighting alone. "I love you, Marin Vale. I love you too." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, watching Eli sleep surrounded by his trucks and his stars. All of this. I love all of this. They stood like that until Eli stirred, made a soft sound, and settled back into sleep. Then they went to their own room, to their own bed, and held each other in the dark while the house breathed around them. 2 years later, the foundation had helped over 300 families. Eli was in a specialized school program that understood his needs and challenged him appropriately. He'd started using some functional speech, mostly single words, but communication nonetheless. He still had meltdowns and sensory issues, and needed routine like other kids needed air, but he was thriving in his own way. Marin had left behind her hospice career completely, though she sometimes missed it. But what she did now felt like the same work in a different form, sitting with people in crisis, helping them find hope, showing them they weren't alone. And Gideon, who'd spent years believing he was broken and failing, had learned to accept that he was doing enough. That loving his son fiercely and building a life around his needs wasn't martyrdom. It was just fatherhood, the good kind. On a spring morning 3 years after Marin first walked through those gates expecting darkness, she woke to find Eli standing by the bed holding his favorite truck. He didn't look at her directly. He still rarely did, but he pressed the truck into her hand and said, in his careful, hard-won voice, "Mama." Marin's breath stopped. She looked at Gideon, who was already awake, tears streaming down his face. "Mama," Eli said again, more certain this time. His hand found hers, held it for a long moment, then let go. Mission accomplished. Message delivered. "Yeah, buddy," Marin managed, her voice breaking. "I'm your mama. I've got you." Eli hummed his 3-note pattern and wandered out of the room, probably heading toward the kitchen and the breakfast routine that never changed, leaving Marin and Gideon staring at each other in stunned silence. "He's never called anyone that," Gideon said. "Not even Caroline. He was too young when she died." I'm his... Marin couldn't finish sentences, could barely breathe around the emotion flooding her chest. "You are. You've been his mother in every way that matters for 3 years. He just made it official." Gideon pulled her close, and they held each other while the magnitude of that single word settled around them. Later, at breakfast, Eli pointed to his waffle and said more when he wanted another piece, pointed to his juice and said, "Drink." Small things to most people, huge victories in their world, but the real victory was the way he kept glancing at Marin, kept making sure she was there, kept seeking her presence like she was part of his essential routine. That afternoon, while Eli was at school and Gideon was in a meeting about the Foundation's expansion, Marin sat in the library where she'd spent so many hours those first weeks, reading textbooks and trying to understand the world she'd stumbled into. She thought about who she'd been then, lost, purposeless, invisible, selling herself to save a brother who'd dragged her down. She thought about who she was now, a wife, a mother, a foundation director, someone who mattered to people and had work that made a difference, someone who was seen and chosen and loved, not despite her ordinariness, but because of the steady strength underneath it. The journey from there to here hadn't been smooth. There had been meltdowns and legal battles and moments when she'd wondered if she was enough, if she'd made the right choice, if love was supposed to feel this hard. But standing on the other side of it, she knew the truth. Love was supposed to feel exactly this hard. Real love, the kind that lasted, was built in the trenches of exhausted 3 a.m. wake-ups and courtroom battles and learning to communicate without words. It was built in the choice to stay when leaving would be easier, in the decision to see people as they were instead of who you wished they'd be, in the daily practice of showing up even when you were tired and scared and had no idea what you were doing. She'd come to this house expecting to endure a year of darkness for her brother's sake. What she'd found instead was light. Messy and complicated and hard-won, but light nonetheless. A family that didn't look like anyone's fantasy, but worked because they'd chosen each other, kept choosing each other, every single day. When Gideon found her in the library that evening, she was crying, but they were good tears, happy tears. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing. Everything's right. That's the problem. Everything's so right it's overwhelming." She pulled him down beside her. 3 years ago, I was invisible. Nobody saw me. Nobody needed me. Nobody would have noticed if I disappeared. And now I have a husband who loves me and a son who calls me mama and work that matters. And it's too much, too good. I don't know what to do with it. You just live it, that's all. You wake up every day and keep choosing this life, and we'll keep choosing you, and that's enough. He wiped her tears with his thumb. You're not invisible anymore, Marin. You're the most important person in our world. Mine and Eli's both. I love you, she said for the 1,000th time, but it still felt new. I love both of you so much it scares me. Good. Be scared. That means it matters. He kissed her softly. I'm scared too. Scared of losing this, losing you, something going wrong. But I choose it anyway. Choose you anyway. Every day. That night, they made love with a tenderness that spoke to everything they'd survived together, everything they'd built. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets and each other, Marin listened to the sounds of the house settling around them. Somewhere down the hall, Eli was sleeping surrounded by his trucks, safe and loved and home. Downstairs, the foundation office held files on families they were helping, lives they were changing. This was her life now. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and hard and full of meaning. She'd come here to save her brother, and somehow in the process she'd saved herself, found herself, became someone worth being. The city lights glittered below the hilltop mansion, the same city that had labeled Gideon Vale a monster and whispered about the terrible secrets hidden behind his gates. But there were no terrible secrets, just a father who loved his son, a child who communicated in gestures, and a woman who'd learned that family wasn't about blood or conventional bonds. It was about who you showed up for when things got hard. Marin had shown up. She'd stayed. And in staying, she'd have found everything she'd been looking for without knowing she was searching. As she drifted off to sleep in Gideon's arms, she thought about those 7 brides who'd run screaming about what they'd missed by leaving. They'd missed the hard parts, yes, but they'd also missed the miracle of Eli's first word to her, the satisfaction of building something that mattered, the depth of love that only came from choosing someone even when it was difficult. Their loss. Her gain. And she wouldn't trade it for anything.